Hello everyone and welcome back to Midnight Horror. I know many of you use these videos to fall asleep, so before you drift off, I'd love it if you could leave a comment letting me know where you're listening from around the world. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe if you're enjoying the video. Story 1. It had been a long night, and all I wanted was to get home. The city streets were slick with rain, neon lights reflecting off the pavement as I waited on the curb. My phone buzzed, alerting me that my Uber had arrived, and I spotted a black sedan pulling up to the designated location. Without thinking twice, I opened the door and slid into the back seat, sighing in relief. The driver didn't acknowledge me, which I found odd. Usually they confirmed my name before starting the ride, but he simply pulled away from the curb. I glanced at my phone to check the app, but to my surprise, the screen was frozen. The car's interior smelled of stale air freshener, and the windows were tinted darker than usual. Something felt off, and a cold unease settled in my stomach. This is for Alex, right?" I asked, hoping for some reassurance. The driver didn't answer at first, his hands gripping the wheel tightly as he maneuvered through the streets. My heart began to pound as I repeated myself, louder this time. He finally responded, his voice low and monotone. "Yeah." He didn't look at me through the mirror, and his answer was too curt to be convincing. I glanced at the GPS on his dashboard, but the screen was turned off. Panic started creeping in as I realized I hadn't double-checked the license plate before getting in. Swallowing my fear, I reached for the door handle, but it didn't budge. The locks were engaged, and I couldn't find a manual way to unlock them. "Hey, I think there's been a mistake. Can you let me out here?" My voice was steady, but my palms were clammy. The driver ignored me, his gaze fixed straight ahead. My breath came faster, and I pressed my phone's power button, hoping to restart it. The screen stayed dark, and I cursed under my breath. "Seriously, I need to get out," I said more forcefully, shifting in my seat. The driver still didn't react, but I noticed his hands tightening around the wheel. The city lights blurred past as he made unexpected turns, heading into a less crowded area. I pressed my hands against the window, trying to see where we were going. The streets became narrower, lined with closed shops and dark alleyways. My stomach churned as I realized we were heading away from the main roads. I reached into my pocket, searching for anything to defend myself with. My keys, a pen, anything sharp enough to use if necessary. My fingers trembled as I clenched my house key between them, my mind racing through possible escape scenarios. I had to stay calm, but every second that passed sent another wave of terror through me. Summoning all my courage, I spoke again, this time with authority. "If you don't let me out, I'm calling the cops." I lifted my phone, pretending it was working. The driver finally reacted, his head tilting slightly as if considering his next move. My pulse pounded as he reached for something in the front seat. Before I could process what was happening, the car slowed, and he pulled into a dimly lit parking lot. My breath caught in my throat as he put the car in park, the engine still running. He turned around, his face shadowed, but I could see the outline of his expression, cold, emotionless. My grip tightened on my key, my muscles tensed for action. "Why are you so scared?" he asked, his voice eerily calm. I couldn't tell if he was amused or irritated. My body screamed at me to run, but I was trapped. My eyes darted around the car, searching for anything I could use to break the window. My heartbeat thundered in my ears as I calculated my next move. Then, without warning, I slammed my shoulder against the door, hoping to jar it loose. The driver didn't flinch, watching me like a predator studying its prey. I didn't have time to second guess myself. If I didn't get out now, I might not get another chance. My breaths came in short gasps as I aimed a kick at the window. The glass didn't shatter, but it made a loud enough noise to attract attention. A figure appeared in the distance, approaching the car with cautious steps. The driver noticed and suddenly put the car in reverse. My stomach lurched as he sped out of the lot, away from the stranger. Panic clawed at my chest as I realized my attempt at escape had backfired. The streets grew even emptier as we drove further away from civilization. My hands shook as I tried the door again, still locked. I had one last option. If I couldn't break the window, I had to fight. With all my strength, I lunged forward, aiming for the driver's head. My sudden movement caught him off guard, and the car swerved violently. He cursed, trying to regain control, but I didn't let up. I clawed at his arm, yanking at the wheel, desperate to force a stop. The car spun out of control, tires screeching as we veered off the road. The impact was jarring as we hit a barrier, and I felt myself thrown against the seat. The airbag didn't deploy, but the sudden stop gave me the opening I needed. Ignoring the pain in my shoulder, I reached for the door again. This time it opened. I stumbled out, my legs shaky beneath me, but I forced myself to run. Behind me, the driver groaned, trying to recover from the crash. I didn't look back, sprinting toward the nearest light source. My breath was ragged, my body running purely on adrenaline. A gas station came into view, and I ran inside, gasping for air as I slammed the door behind me. The cashier looked up, startled by my disheveled state. "Call the police," I panted, bracing myself against the counter. My hands were trembling, but I was safe for now. Minutes later, flashing red and blue lights filled the parking lot. The officers took my statement as I tried to calm my racing heart. They found the car abandoned a few blocks away, but the driver was gone. My stomach churned at the thought that he had vanished into the night, free to do this again. That night I barely slept, my mind replaying every terrifying second. The police assured me they would investigate, but I knew it wouldn't change what had happened. I had made one careless mistake, getting into the wrong car, and it nearly cost me my life. From that moment on, I swore to always double-check before getting inside. It was a mistake I would never make again. Story 2. I arrived at the Airbnb late in the evening, exhausted from the long drive. The house was a charming little cabin tucked away in the woods, just as advertised. The host had left the key under the mat, and everything seemed in order as I stepped inside. The living room had a cozy feel, with a stone fireplace and a large window overlooking the trees. I placed my bags near the couch and wandered into the kitchen, checking out the amenities. Everything seemed clean and well-maintained, which put me at ease. I decided to take a quick shower before settling in for the night. The bathroom was small but modern, with white tiles and a large mirror above the sink. As I turned on the shower, I noticed something unusual near the vent. A small, dark object was positioned oddly between the slats, barely noticeable. My heart pounded as I moved closer, reaching up to examine it. To my horror, it was a tiny camera lens staring right back at me. I yanked my hand away and stepped back, my mind racing with possibilities. Had someone been watching me? How long had it been there? A sick feeling settled in my stomach as I realized I wasn't alone in the way I had thought. Panic set in as I grabbed a towel and hurried out of the bathroom. I retrieved my phone from my bag and started searching online for hidden camera detection methods. Holding up the flashlight, I scanned the room, checking every vent, smoke detector, and power outlet. To my dismay, I found another camera tucked inside the smoke detector above the bed. A cold shiver ran down my spine as I imagined how many people had unknowingly been recorded in this place. Someone had deliberately placed these cameras in intimate spaces. I knew I had to leave immediately, but a part of me wanted to confront the host first. Taking a deep breath, I sent a message explaining what I had found and demanded an explanation. Minutes passed in silence before my phone vibrated with a reply. The host's response was unsettlingly vague, telling me that I was mistaken and there were no such devices in the house. Anger boiled in my chest at the blatant lie. I took pictures of the cameras and dialed the non-emergency police line, my hands trembling. As I waited for a response, I began packing my belongings. The last thing I wanted was to spend another minute in that place. My mind raced with fear, wondering if the host was watching me right now, seeing my every move. A sudden knock at the door made me freeze. It was nearly midnight. Who would be here at this hour? My pulse pounded in my ears as I cautiously approached, peeking through the peephole. A man stood outside, his face partially obscured by the dim porch light. He didn't knock again but remained there, unmoving. I backed away, my stomach twisting with dread. Had the host sent someone? I grabbed my car keys, deciding I couldn't wait any longer. If I left quietly through the back door, I could avoid the stranger outside. Clutching my bag, I tiptoed toward the kitchen, forcing myself to stay calm. The moment I unlocked the back door, the porch light flickered. The sudden darkness sent a jolt of fear through me, but I didn't hesitate. I pushed the door open and ran straight to my car, my breaths coming in ragged gasps. The engine roared to life, and I threw the car into reverse, my eyes darting toward the house. The man was no longer at the front door. My heart pounded as I scanned the driveway, half expecting him to appear in front of my car. I sped down the narrow road leading back to the main highway, gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. My phone buzzed on the seat beside me, but I didn't dare look at it. I just needed to get as far away as possible. Once I reached a well-lit gas station, I pulled over and checked my messages. The host had sent another reply, claiming I had misunderstood and should return so they could discuss it. My stomach churned at the audacity. I called the police again, this time reporting the incident in full detail. They assured me they would investigate and advised me to find a safe place for the night. I booked a room at a nearby motel, my nerves still on edge. Sleep didn't come easily. Every sound outside made me jump, and the thought of those cameras haunted me. Who else had been recorded in that house? And for what purpose? The next morning, an officer called to update me. They had sent someone to check the property, and the cameras were indeed there. The host was being questioned, but it was unclear how long they had been operating. Relief washed over me, but it was mixed with unease. Even if the host was caught, how many other places had cameras hidden inside them? How many unsuspecting guests had no idea they were being watched? I filed an official complaint with the rental platform, providing the evidence I had collected. They assured me the listing would be removed, but that didn't erase the experience from my mind. Trust had been shattered in a place meant to be a temporary home. The drive back home felt longer than before. I kept glancing in my rearview mirror, half expecting to see a car following me. My paranoia lingered, making every stop feel unsafe. Weeks later, I checked online to see if any news had come from the case. The host had been arrested for privacy violations, but no further details were given. The house had been taken off the rental platform, but that didn't mean others weren't out there. I never booked another Airbnb after that. Hotels, while not perfect, felt safer. I made it a habit to scan every room I stayed in, checking for hidden cameras before settling in. The violation had left a permanent mark on me. Some nights I still think about the cameras I didn't find. The ones that might still be hidden in places people least expect. The ones that are still recording, watching, waiting for their next victim. Story 3. It started with small things. I would notice the same dark sedan parked a few houses down from mine, its engine idling in the early hours of the morning. At first, I told myself it was just a coincidence, that someone in the neighborhood had a guest who liked to leave late. But then I saw the car again outside my workplace, parked at the far end of the lot. I tried not to panic, but something about it felt off. The windows were tinted, and I could never see who was inside. Every time I glanced in its direction, I had the eerie sensation that someone was watching me. By the time I left work, the car would be gone, as if it had been there only to remind me of its presence. Then I started seeing him. A man standing across the street from my apartment building, hands in the pockets of a dark hoodie, head tilted slightly downward. He never approached, never spoke. He just stood there, waiting as if for something inevitable. At first, I convinced myself I was imagining things, but deep down I knew better. The feeling of being watched never left me. When I walked home from the grocery store, I could sense him behind me, just far enough to keep me from confronting him. If I turned around too quickly, he would slip into the shadows, blending into alleyways and side streets. My heart pounded every time I checked my locks, triple-checking them before I went to bed. I told myself not to be paranoid, but the signs became impossible to ignore. Footsteps in the hall outside my apartment late at night, heavy and deliberate. The sound of someone pacing just beyond my door, stopping only when I got close enough to listen. My doormat was slightly shifted in the morning, as if someone had stood there for too long. One night I stayed late at work, hoping that if I changed my routine I could lose him. But when I finally left the office, the dark sedan was there again, parked beneath the dim glow of the street lamp. My stomach twisted into knots. I walked briskly, my hands clutching my keys so tightly my knuckles turned white. I dared to glance over my shoulder, and there he was half a block behind me, moving at a measured pace. I turned onto my street and bolted for my apartment, fumbling with my keys as I reached my door. My breath came in ragged gasps as I locked it behind me, pressing my back against the wood. I was safe, at least for the night. But I knew he was still out there, waiting. The next morning, my nerves were frayed beyond reason. I hadn't slept, jumping at every creak and shift in the apartment. I was done pretending this wasn't happening. My hands shook as I dialed the police, my voice barely steady as I explained the situation. The officer on the other end listened in silence before responding with words that made my blood run cold. "We already know who he is." The way they said it, calm, almost resigned, made me shiver. I asked what they meant, but they only told me they would send someone over. When the officer arrived, he had a strange look in his eyes, something like recognition. He asked me to describe the man, the car, every detail I could remember. I answered everything, but with each word, his expression darkened. Finally, he let out a slow breath and looked me in the eye. "You should stay somewhere else for a few days." That was not the answer I expected. My stomach twisted as I pressed him for more information. Who was this man? Why was he following me? But the officer only shook his head, saying it was an open case and that I needed to be cautious. That night, I packed a bag and stayed with a friend across town, but sleep never came. The next day, I went back to my apartment, half expecting everything to be fine, that maybe this was all some misunderstanding. But when I reached my door, there was something waiting for me. A note, tucked beneath my doormat, written in small, precise handwriting. It read, "You can't hide forever." My heart slammed against my ribs. I scanned the street, expecting to see him standing there, watching as he always did. But the sidewalk was empty, the sedan nowhere in sight. The silence felt suffocating. I ran back to my car and drove straight to the police station. This time they took me into a back office, a different officer speaking to me in hushed tones. They told me that the man had been following people for years, that he had a pattern of fixation on certain individuals. They had never been able to catch him, never able to predict who he would target next. And now it was me. The officer assured me they would keep an eye on my place, that they would do their best to find him. But their words felt hollow, like they had said this before and it had never amounted to anything. That night I stayed at a hotel, the weight of exhaustion pressing down on me, but still I couldn't sleep. Days passed, and I saw nothing of him. No car, no shadow in the distance, no note waiting for me at my door. The police checked in but had no updates. It was like he had vanished. I should have been relieved, but instead I felt like I was waiting for something worse. Then, one night, I heard it. A knock at my window. I was on the second floor. Slowly, I turned my head, dread creeping up my spine. The blinds were closed, but I could see the faintest shift of a shadow behind them. My throat closed up. I reached for my phone, but the second I grabbed it, the shadow moved away. I didn't hear footsteps, just silence. I called the police again, my voice barely above a whisper. They arrived within minutes, searching the area, but found nothing. No footprints, no signs of forced entry. Just a lingering presence in the air, a feeling that I would never truly be safe. That was a month ago. I moved to a new apartment, changed my routine, even switched jobs. I stopped answering unknown calls, stopped looking over my shoulder as much. But sometimes, when I wake in the middle of the night, I feel it. That undeniable sensation of being watched. And I wonder if he's still out there, waiting for me to let my guard down. Story 4. I arrived at the hotel late in the evening, exhausted from a long day of traveling. The lobby was quiet, save for the receptionist who barely looked up as she handed me my key card. My room was on the 7th floor, and as I rode the elevator up, I found myself longing for a hot shower and some sleep. When I reached my door, I slid the key card into the reader, but the light flashed red. I tried again, assuming I hadn't swiped it fast enough, but the result was the same. Annoyed, I jiggled the handle, wondering if it was stuck, but it didn't budge. Sighing, I turned and walked back to the elevator, descending to the front desk. The receptionist barely reacted when I explained my situation, simply reactivating my card and handing it back. I thanked her and returned upstairs, hoping the issue was resolved. Back at my door, I tried the card again, but it still wouldn't work. This time I knocked, half expecting an answer, but silence greeted me. I checked the room number again, confirming that I was at the right place. Frustrated, I called the front desk and explained that my key still wasn't working. The receptionist, in the same monotone voice, said she would send security up. A few minutes later, an older man in a hotel uniform arrived, holding a master key. He swiped the key card, but the door remained locked. Frowning, he tried again with no success. Muttering under his breath, he radioed for maintenance, who arrived with a set of tools and began working on the lock. As I stood in the hallway, I couldn't shake the unease creeping into my gut. It shouldn't be this hard to open a hotel room door. The security guard noticed my expression and assured me that sometimes the electronic locks malfunctioned. Finally, after several minutes, the lock clicked and the maintenance worker pushed the door open. I stepped inside, but something was immediately wrong. The room wasn't mine, my belongings were gone, and someone else's things were inside. I turned to the security guard, my stomach twisting. He looked just as confused as I felt and stepped in behind me, glancing around. The bed was neatly made, and a suitcase sat near the closet, but it wasn't mine. I hurried to the closet, pulling the door open, hoping to see my clothes. Instead, a row of neatly pressed suits hung inside, none of which belonged to me. The bathroom counter was lined with toiletries that I had never seen before. "This isn't my room," I said, my voice coming out hoarse. The security guard frowned and picked up the phone on the nightstand, calling the front desk. He asked them to check who was assigned to this room. The receptionist responded after a long pause, and the security guard's brow furrowed deeper. He turned to me, a strange look on his face. According to the hotel system, I had never been assigned to this room. My heart pounded in my chest as I shook my head. "That's impossible," I said. "I checked in just an hour ago. I was given this key." I pulled out my card and showed it to him, but he only glanced at it. "We should go downstairs," he said, his voice unusually calm. He gestured for me to step out, and I followed him, my mind racing. None of this made sense if this wasn't my room, or were my things. Back at the front desk, the receptionist typed something into the computer and shook her head. "You were checked in," she said, "but to a different room." She slid a new key card across the desk. I hesitated before picking it up, my skin crawling. "Then whose room was I just trying to get into?" I asked. The receptionist didn't answer right away, her eyes fixed on the screen. "No one," she finally said. "That room hasn't been occupied in days." My stomach twisted painfully, and I turned to the security guard, who looked just as disturbed as I felt. "That's not possible," I said. "There were clothes, suitcases, personal items. Someone was living in that room." My voice was rising, but I didn't care. I needed answers. The receptionist's face paled slightly. "We'll have housekeeping check it," she murmured, avoiding my gaze. "For now, you should go to your assigned room." I took the new key card and made my way to the correct room, feeling the weight of unease pressing against my chest. When I entered, everything was as it should be: my bag on the bed, my shoes by the door. I double-checked the closet and bathroom, making sure nothing was out of place. Everything was where I had left it, yet I couldn't shake the feeling that something was deeply wrong. Sleep didn't come easily that night. Every noise in the hallway made me tense, and I kept replaying the moment the door finally opened. If no one had been staying in that room, then where had those things come from? The next morning, I returned to the front desk, determined to get more information. The same receptionist was on duty, but when I asked about the room again, she only shook her head. "There was nothing there," she said. "Housekeeping checked, and the room was empty." Her expression was unreadable, but I knew she was lying. I had seen those belongings with my own eyes. I wanted to argue, to demand an explanation, but something about the way she looked at me made me stop. It was as if she was warning me not to ask any more questions. I checked out later that afternoon, my mind still spinning. As I waited for my taxi, I glanced up at the 7th floor. My room's curtains were drawn, but the window beside it had the blinds open. For a brief second, I thought I saw a figure standing there, watching, but when I blinked, the window was empty. Story 5. Driving alone at night was something I had gotten used to, but that didn't mean I liked it. The long, empty road stretching ahead of me, the occasional flicker of headlights in my rearview mirror, it all had a way of making the world feel eerily quiet. That night, I was halfway home when I saw the flashing red and blue lights in my mirror, signaling me to pull over. I felt my stomach twist as I slowed down and moved onto the shoulder of the road. Something about this felt off, though I couldn't quite place why. The vehicle behind me wasn't a marked police car. just a dark sedan with lights mounted on top. As I sat there, gripping the steering wheel, I watched the man in uniform step out and approach my car. His uniform looked official enough, but something didn't sit right with me. It was too crisp, too clean, as if it had never been worn before. The badge on his chest caught the dim glow of my headlights, but there was no nameplate beneath it. When he reached my window, I hesitated before rolling it down, keeping my hands firmly on the wheel. "License and registration," he said, his voice calm but lacking any real authority. There was something unnatural about the way he stood, as if he were mimicking how a real officer would behave. His face was partially shadowed, but I could see a faint smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. My pulse quickened as I reached slowly for my wallet, my instincts screaming that something was wrong. I decided to ask a question, hoping to gauge his reaction. "What's the reason for the stop, officer?" I asked, keeping my tone steady. He didn't answer right away, instead tilting his head slightly as if he hadn't expected me to ask. Then, after a pause, he said, "Routine check. Just need to see your ID." That wasn't right. Routine checks weren't done like this, not on an empty stretch of highway in the middle of the night. I glanced at the car behind him, noting that it had no police markings at all. A real officer would have announced their department, given a clear reason for stopping me, and wouldn't have hesitated when questioned. A cold sweat broke out on the back of my neck as I tried to think fast. I knew I had two choices: comply and hope for the best, or stall and look for a way out. My fingers tightened around my wallet, but instead of handing it over, I reached for my phone. "I'd like to call this in, just for confirmation," I said, my voice steady but firm. His expression darkened immediately. "That won't be necessary," he said quickly, his tone sharper now. He took a step closer, placing one hand on my car door. My heart pounded as I realized just how alone I was on this road, with no other cars in sight. The way he was acting now, I knew for certain this man wasn't a cop. Every instinct told me to get out of there, but I had to be smart about it. If I made the wrong move, he might react badly. Keeping my voice calm, I forced a polite smile. "I understand, but I just want to be sure. You know how it is these days." I lifted my phone slowly, pretending to dial. His entire posture changed in an instant. His fingers tensed against my car door, his eyes flicking toward the road as if calculating something. "Step out of the vehicle," he ordered, his voice now completely devoid of the calm demeanor from before. That was the moment I knew I was in real danger. I didn't respond. Instead, I made a split-second decision and slammed my car into drive. The tires screeched as I swerved back onto the road, gripping the wheel tightly as I accelerated. My hands shook, adrenaline flooding my veins as I kept my eyes on the road ahead. In my mirror, I saw him standing there for a moment before running back to his car. The headlights behind me flared to life, and I knew he wasn't going to let me go that easily. My heart raced as the dark sedan sped up, closing the distance between us. He wasn't a cop, he was something else, something worse. And now he was chasing me down an empty road with no witnesses in sight. I kept my foot pressed to the gas, scanning the road desperately for any sign of an exit or a populated area. The town wasn't too far away, but I wasn't sure I could make it before he caught up. My phone was still in my lap, and with trembling fingers, I hit the emergency call button. 911, what's your emergency? The operator's voice came through, steady and calm. "I'm being followed by a fake cop," I said breathlessly, barely keeping my car steady. He pulled me over, but something was off. Now he's chasing me. My voice wavered, but I forced myself to stay focused. "Stay on the line with me," the operator said. "Can you describe the vehicle?" I quickly gave as much detail as I could, all while keeping my eyes locked on the road ahead. The sedan was still behind me, but it wasn't gaining as fast as before. Maybe he realized I had called for help. "We have officers en route to your location," the operator assured me. "Keep driving toward a well-lit area if you can." I nodded, even though she couldn't see me, and gripped the wheel harder. The town's lights were coming into view now, a distant but welcome sight. If I could just make it there, I'd be safe. The sedan suddenly swerved to the left, then the right, as if debating whether to continue the chase. I watched as it slowed down, then made a sharp U-turn and disappeared into the darkness. My breath hitched as I realized he was giving up. He wasn't willing to risk running into real cops. Moments later, flashing lights approached from the opposite direction. A real police cruiser pulled up beside me as I slowed down, my entire body shaking from the ordeal. An officer stepped out and signaled for me to park. This time I knew for certain it was the real thing. I rolled down my window, barely able to get the words out. "That guy wasn't a cop," I said, my voice hoarse. The officer nodded. "We've had reports of a man impersonating law enforcement in this area," he confirmed. "You did the right thing by not stopping completely." I let out a shaky breath, relief washing over me in waves. The officer took my statement and assured me they'd do everything they could to track the guy down. But as I sat there in the glow of real police lights, I couldn't shake the thought of what might have happened if I had stepped out of my car. That night, I learned a terrifying lesson sometimes. Danger wears a badge, and if something feels wrong, it probably is. Story 6. The highway stretched endlessly before me, a lonely ribbon of asphalt cutting through the empty desert. The sun had set hours ago, leaving only the glow of my headlights to illuminate the road ahead. I had been driving for hours, fighting the creeping exhaustion that clung to my limbs like a heavy fog. Up ahead, a figure stood by the side of the road, arm outstretched in the universal sign for a ride. His silhouette was long and lean, his posture almost too still against the backdrop of the barren landscape. Something about him made me hesitate, but the thought of leaving someone stranded in the middle of nowhere gnawed at me. I slowed the car and rolled down the window, eyeing him warily as he stepped closer. "Where you headed?" I asked, keeping my foot on the brake. He peered inside, his face shadowed, but his voice was smooth when he answered. "Anywhere up the road would be fine." His vague response unsettled me, but I nodded and unlocked the passenger door. He slid inside with practiced ease, shutting the door with a slow, deliberate motion. As I pulled back onto the road, he settled into his seat, his gaze fixed straight ahead. Minutes passed in silence, the only sounds the hum of the engine and the faint whistling of wind through a crack in the window. I stole a glance at him and noticed how rigidly he sat, his hands folded neatly in his lap. "You from around here?" I asked, hoping to cut the tension. He turned his head slightly, his expression unreadable. "Just passing through," he said, his voice carrying an odd, empty tone. Something about his presence felt off, a creeping unease settling in my stomach. I nodded, gripping the wheel tighter, feeling the hairs on the back of my neck rise. I had picked up hitchhikers before, but none had ever made me this uneasy. I glanced at the exit signs, considering whether I should drop him off sooner rather than later. "Long drive?" he asked suddenly, his voice breaking the silence. I nodded, forcing a smile. "Yeah, heading a few states over. Just trying to cover as much ground as I can tonight." He hummed in response, his fingers tapping idly on his knee. "You ever pick up strangers often?" he asked, his tone carrying something beneath it, something unreadable. I shrugged, trying to keep my voice casual. "Sometimes. Never had much trouble." The moment the words left my mouth, I regretted them. He turned his head fully now, his gaze locking onto me with an intensity that made my skin crawl. "Guess there's a first time for everything," he murmured, his lips curving into a slow, deliberate smile. A chill ran through me and I swallowed hard, keeping my eyes on the road. Something about that smile made my pulse quicken. I forced a chuckle, my hands tightening around the wheel. "Yeah, I suppose so." I reached for the radio, needing some kind of noise to cut through the thick silence, but as soon as I touched the dial, he spoke again. "No need for music. I prefer the quiet." His voice was firm, almost commanding. I let my hand drop back to my lap, an uneasy tension gripping my chest. The road stretched on, each mile feeling longer than the last. I stole another glance at him and noticed how he hadn't moved much, his posture unnervingly stiff. My nerves were on edge, my instincts screaming at me that something wasn't right. Finally, I spotted a sign for a small rest stop a few miles ahead. Relief flooded me as I forced a casual tone. "Hey, I'm stopping soon for gas. You can get off there if you need to." He didn't respond right away, just kept staring ahead with that unsettling stillness. Then, after a long pause, he turned his head and said, "I think I'll stay a little longer." His voice was softer now, almost amused. My stomach twisted at his words. I tightened my grip on the wheel, my mind racing. "Sorry, man, but I don't go too far with passengers," I lied, keeping my voice steady. "This is where I let folks off." He chuckled, the sound low and humorless. "That's funny. I don't recall asking for permission to stay." My heart pounded as he shifted slightly, his body turning toward me now. The exit for the rest stop loomed ahead, and I flicked on my turn signal. As I slowed, he reached out, pressing a hand against my forearm. His grip was firm, his touch ice cold. "I wouldn't do that if I were you." A deep, instinctual fear clawed at my chest, but I forced my face to remain neutral. "Look, man, I don't want any trouble," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. His fingers tightened briefly before he let go, leaning back into his seat. "Trouble?" he echoed, tilting his head. "Oh, you'll know trouble soon enough." The way he said it, so calm, so assured, made my breath catch. I took the exit anyway, my mind set. As soon as I reached the gas station, I would make a run for it. But as I pulled into the dimly lit lot, the hitchhiker simply smiled wider. I killed the engine and unbuckled my seatbelt, my movements slow and deliberate. "This is your stop," I said firmly. He didn't move. He just sat there, watching me, his grin unwavering. My hands trembled as I reached for the door handle. Before I could move, he leaned in, whispering, "You should have kept driving." My breath hitched as the overhead lights flickered, plunging the lot into momentary darkness. When the lights came back on, the passenger seat was empty. My heart pounded violently as I turned, searching the shadows outside. There was no sign of him, no footprints in the dirt, no sound of retreating footsteps. The seatbelt lay buckled, as if he had never been there at all. A cold dread seeped into my bones as I stared at the empty seat, my breath coming in shallow gasps. Then, just as I reached for my phone, the radio crackled to life, static filling the silence. And beneath it, a voice whispered, "See you soon." Story 7. The first night I heard the knock, I thought I had imagined it. It was exactly 3 a.m., and the sound was so precise. 3 solid knocks against my apartment door. My heart pounded as I sat up in bed, straining to listen. But when I crept toward the peephole, the hallway outside was empty. The second night it happened again. This time I was awake before it came, my mind tense with anticipation. 3 deliberate knocks echoed in the silence, and when I opened the door seconds later, I found nothing but the dimly lit corridor stretching ahead, By the third night, I was certain it wasn't a coincidence. I kept my phone in my hand, ready to record or call for help if necessary. At 3 a.m. sharp, the knocks came 3 firm raps, evenly spaced, and when I flung the door open, the hallway was still and empty. I asked my neighbors the next day if they had heard anything strange. Mrs. Patel in 4 billion just shook her head, saying she slept deeply, and the young man in 3 looked at me like I was crazy. No one else had heard the knocks, and I started to wonder if I was losing my mind. That night, I decided to set up my phone to record the door. I balanced it on the kitchen counter with a clear view of the entrance, hit record, and sat awake in the darkness. When 3 a.m. arrived, the knocks came loud and deliberate, but when I played the recording back, there was nothing. The silence on the video unnerved me more than the knocks themselves. I knew I had heard them, felt the vibrations through the floor, but there was no proof. Something was wrong, and I was starting to feel like my apartment wasn't entirely mine anymore. On the 6th night, I tried something different. I placed a line of flour in front of the door, hoping to catch footprints. The knocks came just as before, and I jumped out of bed to check. The flour was undisturbed, no marks, no sign that anyone had been there at all. I hardly slept after that, always waiting for 3 a.m. I thought about staying somewhere else, but the fear that the knocking might follow me kept me rooted in place. My apartment had become a trap, a space filled with waiting, with dread thickening the air as the night stretched on. On the 9th night, something changed. The knocks were heavier, deeper, resonating through the walls. They weren't coming from the front door anymore, they were inside. I froze, feeling my stomach drop as I realized the sound had come from my bedroom closet. I couldn't move at first, too terrified to even breathe. The closet door was shut, as it always was, but now it felt ominous, looming in the dark. When I finally found the courage to move, I grabbed my phone and turned on the flashlight, my hands shaking as I stepped forward. The closet was empty. My clothes hung undisturbed, my storage boxes stacked neatly, nothing out of place. Yet the feeling of something unseen lingered, thick and oppressive, and I slammed the door shut, pressing my back against it as I tried to calm my breathing. The next day, I spent hours researching my building, looking for any clue, any history that might explain what was happening. There were no reports of deaths, no urban legends, nothing that would explain why someone or something was knocking at 3 a.m. every night. By the 12th night, I was exhausted, my nerves frayed from lack of sleep. I sat by the door, my hand hovering over the doorknob as I waited. When the knocks came, I wrenched the door open instantly, determined to catch whatever was doing this, but once again, the hallway was empty. Except this time, something was different. A small object lay on the floor just outside my door. It was a single, rusted key, old and worn, its surface corroded with time. I picked it up with trembling fingers, my mind racing with questions. I examined every lock in my apartment, but the key didn't fit anywhere. I had no idea what had opened or why it had appeared. That night, I barely slept, clutching the key in my hand, half expecting more knocks, but none came. For the first time in 2 weeks, 3 a.m. passed in silence. I should have been relieved, but the quiet felt wrong, heavier than before. The knocking had stopped, but I had the sense that something had changed, something unseen had shifted, waiting for me to notice. The next day, I decided to ask the building manager about my unit. He hesitated before answering, then admitted my apartment had been vacant for a long time before I moved in. The last tenant had left suddenly, breaking their lease without explanation. I pressed him for details, but he only shrugged, saying the tenant had been young, quiet, and had never caused problems. The only odd thing, he added, was that they had left a key behind. When I showed him the one I found, he paled, his eyes darting to my apartment door. I wanted to leave, but something kept me there, an unfinished story pulling at me. That night, I placed the key on my nightstand and lay awake, listening. The silence stretched on, but just as I began to drift off, a faint sound reached me, a soft creaking, like a door slowly opening. I bolted upright, my eyes darting around the room. My closet door stood open. I was sure I had closed it before bed. The air in the room felt heavy, charged with something unseen, something waiting. My pulse pounded as I forced myself to stand, to approach the open door. Inside, something had changed. My clothes and boxes were pushed aside, revealing a narrow gap at the back wall. A small, almost imperceptible seam ran along the edges, like the outline of a hidden door. My breath caught as I reached for the rusted key on my nightstand. I hesitated, my hand shaking as I pressed the key against the seam. The moment it touched, a soft click echoed in the silence, and the hidden door creaked open slightly. A dark void stretched beyond it, a space that shouldn't exist. My mind screamed to shut it, to leave it alone. But something inside me needed to know. I took a deep breath, stepped forward, and pushed the door open wider. Cold air rushed out, carrying the scent of damp wood and something faintly metallic. My phone's flashlight barely penetrated the darkness, revealing only a narrow passage leading further in. I turned back once, glancing at my apartment, my safe, known space. Then I stepped inside. The door creaked shut behind me, sealing me in the silence, and I understood I hadn't been alone all this time. Something had been waiting, knocking, calling me to find it, and now I had answered. Story 8. I had been hearing noises at night for weeks. At first, I chalked it up to the house settling, or maybe a raccoon finding its way into the attic. But as the nights stretched on, the noises became more distinct: footsteps, the shuffle of something heavy, even the faint sound of breathing. Lying in bed, I tried to rationalize what I was hearing. Maybe it was my mind playing tricks on me, or perhaps my neighbors were making more noise than usual. But deep down, I felt something was off, something I couldn't ignore any longer. Determined to get to the bottom of it, I bought a small motion-activated camera and set it up in the attic. I figured if it was an animal, I'd call pest control, and if it was nothing, at least I could put my mind at ease. That night, I went to bed with an uneasy feeling, half hoping to catch nothing at all. The next morning, I checked the footage with a cup of coffee in hand. My heart pounded as I watched the screen, my fingers tightening around the mug. What I saw made my blood turn cold. A figure, barely visible in the dim light, crawling on all fours across the attic floor. I froze, my mind refusing to accept what I was seeing. The figure moved with slow, deliberate motions, almost as if it knew where the camera was. Then, at one chilling moment, it turned its head toward the lens, revealing hollow eyes and a face smeared with grime. I dropped my coffee, the ceramic shattering against the tile. My breath came in short, panic gasps as I replayed the footage over and over. Someone was living in my attic. Not an animal, not a ghost, but a real person. For a moment I considered running straight out of the house. But where would I go? The police. I needed to call the police. My hands trembled as I reached for my phone, my eyes darting toward the ceiling, suddenly hyper-aware of every sound above me. I whispered into the phone, giving my address and explaining the situation as calmly as I could. The operator assured me an officer was on the way, but even as I hung up, I felt trapped. The thought of someone lurking just above me made my skin crawl. Minutes stretched into eternity as I waited for the police to arrive. Every creak in the house sent a jolt of terror through my body. I gripped a kitchen knife, my pulse hammering in my ears. Then, just as I was about to break down, red and blue lights flashed through my windows. The officers wasted no time. They entered my house with their hands on their holsters, nodding for me to stay put. I watched as they pulled down the attic ladder and climbed up, their flashlights cutting through the darkness. The silence that followed was suffocating. Then, a shout rang out, followed by scuffling sounds. My stomach twisted as I heard a thud, then footsteps coming back down the ladder. One of the officers emerged, dragging a man behind him, a gaunt, dirt-covered figure with wild eyes and ragged clothing. The intruder struggled weakly, his thin frame barely putting up a fight. The other officer descended with a stained sleeping bag and a collection of food wrappers. My stomach churned as I realized he had been living above me, stealing my food, listening to me move around my own home. One of the officers turned to me and asked how long I had been hearing noises. I stammered out a response, still staring at the man as he avoided my gaze. The officer nodded grimly and said cases like this weren't as rare as people thought. As they led the man outside, I finally found my voice. How did he get in? My throat was dry, my hands still shaking. The officer pointed to a small vent on the side of the house. He must have crawled in through there. Looks like he's been here for a while. The reality of it hit me like a sledgehammer. Every night, while I had been sleeping, he had been mere feet away, separated by only a thin ceiling. I felt sick, my mind racing with possibilities. Had he ever watched me through the vents? Had he ever stood over me while I slept? The officers assured me they would file a full report and suggested I stay with a friend until I could get the attic properly secured. I nodded, though I wasn't sure I'd ever feel safe in my home again. The thought of returning to that house, knowing what had been lurking above me, made my skin crawl. That night I slept at a friend's house, but sleep didn't come easy. Every sound, every shadow felt like a threat. My mind replayed the footage over and over, the way he had moved, the way he had stared at the camera. I knew I would never forget that face. The next day, I hired a contractor to seal every possible entry point. The vent was replaced with reinforced steel, the attic ladder secured with a heavy lock. I even installed a security system, though it did little to ease my lingering paranoia. Weeks passed, and slowly, life returned to normal. But the fear never truly left me. Sometimes in the dead of night, I'd wake up drenched in sweat, convinced I had heard something above me. My heart would race as I listened, barely daring to breathe. Eventually, I stopped checking the attic. I told myself it was over, that he was gone, that I was safe. But deep down, a part of me would always wonder, had he really been caught the first time? Or was there someone else, still up there, waiting for me to let my guard down? Story 9. The highway stretched out before me, empty except for the occasional flickering road sign. My GPS had been acting strange for the past few miles, rerouting and recalibrating in ways that didn't make sense. I chalked it up to poor signal and kept driving, trusting it to guide me to my motel for the night. The sky was dark, the trees on either side of the road looming like silent watchers. A few miles later, the GPS instructed me to take a left onto a narrow, unmarked road. It looked more like a service path than an actual street, but I hesitated only for a moment before following its lead. The road twisted through dense forest, the pavement soon giving way to gravel and dirt. My headlights cast long shadows across the trees, and a strange unease settled in my chest. The further I went, the less sense any of it made. My GPS had gone eerily silent, no longer announcing turns or estimated arrival times. When I glanced at my phone, I saw that my signal had completely vanished. The only sound was the crunch of gravel under my tires and the low hum of my engine as I crept forward. A sudden realization hit me. I had seen no street signs, no mile markers, no indication that this was even a real road. My gut told me to turn around, but the road was too narrow for a quick U-turn. Just as I began searching for a clearing to reverse, my headlights illuminated something up ahead. A group of men stood in the middle of the road, waiting. I slammed my foot on the brake, my pulse hammering against my ribs. There were at least 5 of them, dressed in dark clothes, their faces hidden in shadow. None of them moved, none of them spoke, but they were all staring at me. A sickening dread spread through my stomach as I gripped the steering wheel tighter, every nerve in my body screaming at me to get out of there. I threw the car into reverse, tires skidding against the loose gravel. The men didn't run toward me, didn't make any sudden moves, but I could see the faint glint of something metallic in one of their hands. My heart pounded as my car struggled to gain traction, the back wheels spinning before finally catching the dirt. I turned sharply, trying to angle myself for a quick escape. Just as I was about to straighten out, my headlights flickered, and for a split second, I thought my car was about to die. The panic clawing at my chest made it hard to think straight, but I forced myself to focus. I didn't care if I hit a tree or tore up the undercarriage. I needed to get away. I pressed down hard on the gas, my car lurching backward as I fought to keep control. One of the men stepped forward, then slowly, deliberately, as if he had all the time in the world. My tires finally found enough grip, and I spun the car around, the back end fishtailing wildly. As I sped away, I caught a glimpse of the man in my rearview mirror. He hadn't stopped walking, his expression unreadable as he watched me disappear down the road. I didn't let up on the gas until I reached the main highway, my entire body trembling. My hands were slick with sweat, my breath coming in shallow gasps as I struggled to make sense of what had just happened. My GPS screen was still frozen, displaying an error message where my route had been. I shut it off and drove blindly, just wanting to put as much distance between me and that road as possible. When I finally saw the glow of a gas station up ahead, I pulled in and parked under the bright overhead lights. My hands were still shaking as I reached for my phone, but my signal had returned. I checked my GPS history, trying to find out what route it had taken me through. There was nothing, no record of the turn, no log of the road I had just escaped from. I asked the clerk inside if he knew anything about the area, but he only gave me a confused look. According to him, there was no road where I claimed to have been. The forest stretched out for miles, untouched and unmarked by any paths. He assured me I must have been mistaken, but I knew what I had seen. I knew there were men waiting there. Back in my car, I locked the doors and tried to calm myself down. My destination was still another hour away, but I wasn't sure I could trust my GPS again. I manually typed in my model's address, double-checking the route before setting off. Every turn I made, I scanned my surroundings, half expecting to see headlights trailing me. When I finally reached my motel, I parked as close to the entrance as possible and hurried inside. My nerves were still raw, my body running on pure adrenaline. The night clerk barely looked up as I checked in, oblivious to the terror that still clung to me. Once inside my room, I bolted the door and sat on the bed, staring at my phone in silence. I thought about calling someone, telling them what had happened, but I wasn't sure what I would even say. There was no proof, no evidence that I had almost driven into something terrible. My GPS had erased the route. The gas station clerk had never heard of the road, and by morning it would all seem like some fevered nightmare. But I knew better. I had seen them waiting for me. My GPS had led me straight to them, and if I hadn't reacted in time, I might not have been so lucky. Lying in bed, I tried to push the thoughts away, but one question remained. What would have happened if I hadn't turned around in time? Story 10. I went for my usual evening jog, the sun dipping below the horizon as the streetlights flickered on. The neighborhood was quiet, the occasional car passing by, but something felt off. A white van was parked a few houses down, its headlights dim, almost as if it were trying not to be noticed. At first I brushed it off, focusing on my pace as I ran along my usual route. The crisp evening air filled my lungs as my shoes pounded against the pavement. But as I turned onto a less busy street, I heard the distinct hum of an engine behind me. Glancing over my shoulder, I noticed the van moving slowly, keeping a steady distance behind me. My stomach twisted, but I tried to ignore it, convincing myself it was just my imagination. However, when I picked up my pace, the van did the same, matching my speed. A cold sweat broke out along my back as my mind raced through my options. The street I was on had few houses, and the nearest main road was a few blocks away. I needed to think fast, but panic was starting to creep in. I decided to test the van's movements, suddenly slowing to a casual walk. The van, too, slowed down, maintaining its distance. My pulse pounded in my ears, and I knew then that I wasn't imagining things. Whoever was in that van was watching me, waiting. Taking a deep breath, I turned a corner and immediately broke into a sprint. My legs burned as I pushed myself forward, desperate to put as much distance between me and the van as possible. But the sound of the engine revving up sent a bolt of fear through me. I could hear the tires screeching slightly as the van sped up again. My heart pounded wildly as I realized it was closing in on me. There was no time to think. I needed to find help, a place to hide, something. Up ahead, I spotted a house with its porch light on. Without hesitation, I bolted toward it, running up the driveway as fast as I could. I banged on the door, my breaths coming in sharp gasps as I glanced over my shoulder. The van had stopped at the edge of the driveway, idling for a few moments. I kept pounding on the door, silently pleading for someone to answer. Just as I was about to scream, the porch light flickered and the door creaked open. A middle-aged woman peeked out, her eyes widening when she saw me. I barely managed to get out the words, my voice shaking as I explained that a van had been following me. Her face turned serious as she pulled me inside, locking the door behind me. We peered through the curtains, watching as the van lingered at the end of the driveway. It sat there for what felt like an eternity before suddenly reversing and speeding off into the night. My body slumped against the wall, relief washing over me in waves. The woman, who introduced herself as Mrs. Turner, handed me a glass of water and let me catch my breath. She insisted on calling the police, and I nodded, still shaken. As she dialed, I replayed everything in my mind, my hands trembling slightly. When the officers arrived, I recounted the entire incident, describing the van as best as I could. They took my statements seriously, nodding as they jotted down notes. One officer mentioned that a similar vehicle had been reported in the area before, following other women on their evening walks or jogs. That revelation sent a chill down my spine. The idea that whoever was in that van had likely done this before, possibly with worse intentions, made my stomach turn. The officers promised to patrol the neighborhood and advised me to be extra cautious in the future. After they left, Miss Turner offered to drive me home, and I gratefully accepted. The ride was quiet, my mind still processing everything that had happened. I knew one thing for certain: I wouldn't be jogging alone in the evenings anymore. That night, sleep didn't come easily. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the van, the way it lurked in the shadows before creeping closer. The sound of its engine still echoed in my ears, making me shudder. The next day, I told a few close friends about what had happened. Their reactions were a mix of horror and concern, and they urged me to file another report if I saw anything suspicious again. It was a terrifying reminder that danger could be lurking even in familiar places. I started making changes to my routine, no longer jogging at night and always letting someone know where I was going. I also carried pepper spray, my grip tightening around it whenever I felt uneasy. The fear lingered, but I refused to let it control me. Weeks passed, and while I tried to move on, the experience stayed with me. I found myself watching every car that passed, my pulse quickening if one slowed down near me. It was exhausting, but I couldn't shake the paranoia that had settled in. One evening while out with a friend, I spotted a van that looked eerily similar to the one that had followed me. My breath hitched as I grabbed my friend's arm, my eyes locked onto the vehicle. But this time I wasn't alone. We quickly reported it, giving as many details as we could. The police took our call seriously, promising to keep an eye out, though I never found out if they caught the person behind the wheel. Knowing I had taken action made me feel a little stronger. The incident had changed me, making me more cautious, more aware of my surroundings. But it also made me realize the importance of trusting my instincts. If something feels wrong, it probably is, and it's better to act fast than to regret hesitation later. Looking back, I know I was lucky that night. Had I not found that house, had Miss Turner not opened the door in time, things could have ended very differently. The thought alone made my skin crawl, but I refused to let fear define me. From then on, I made a promise to myself. I would never let my guard down again, and I would always be prepared. Because the world wasn't as safe as I once believed. And sometimes, the danger wasn't just in the dark, it was right behind you, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Story 11. I arrived home late in the evening, my hands fumbling in my bag for my keys. The street was quiet, bathed in the dull glow of the streetlights, and the cool night air carried the distant hum of a passing car. I found the key and slid it into the lock, only to realize it wouldn't turn. Confused, I tried again, jiggling the key and applying more pressure. The lock resisted, as if it belonged to a different door entirely. My pulse quickened as I stepped back, glancing up at the familiar windows of my home, their curtains drawn just as I had left them that morning. I checked the key in my palm, running my fingers over its familiar ridges. It was my key, the same one I had used every day. A creeping unease settled in my stomach as I peered through the small window beside the door. Inside, the lights were on, casting a warm glow over the living room. My breath caught in my throat as I saw movement. A man was walking through my home, completely at ease, as if he belonged there. My first thought was that I had been robbed, that a stranger had broken in while I was at work. But he wasn't rummaging through my belongings or stuffing valuables into a bag. He was simply moving through the house, calm and unhurried. I knocked on the door, my heart hammering in my chest. The man paused, turning his head toward the sound, and for a brief moment, our eyes met through the glass. His face was unreadable, but there was something unsettling about the way he stared at me. I reached for my phone and dialed the police with trembling fingers. As I waited for an answer, I kept my eyes on the man, watching his every move. He didn't seem startled or nervous. If anything, he looked mildly annoyed, as if I were the intruder. The dispatcher answered, and I forced myself to speak steadily. I explained the situation, my voice hushed in case the man could hear me. The dispatcher assured me that officers were on their way and advised me to stay outside and keep my distance. As I stood there, I noticed something even more disturbing. The furniture was different. The couch in the living room wasn't mine, and the painting above the fireplace was one I had never seen before. It was as if my house had been replaced with a version that belonged to someone else. I backed away from the door, glancing around to see if any of my neighbors were outside. The houses on my street were dark, their occupants likely already asleep. I was alone in the quiet night, staring at a home that was mine and yet wasn't. Minutes passed, stretching unbearably long, until I saw the blue and red lights of a police car approaching. Relief flooded through me as two officers stepped out, their hands resting on their holsters. I waved them over, trying to keep my breathing steady. I explained everything again, this time with the officers standing beside me. One of them knocked on the door, calling out that it was the police. The man inside hesitated before finally approaching the entrance. When he opened the door, he looked completely at ease. "This is my house," he said simply, his voice calm and unwavering. "I don't know who this person is." I gaped at him, my head spinning. "That's not true. This is my home. I've lived here for years." The officer glanced between us before asking me for identification. My hands were shaking as I pulled out my ID, handing it over. The officer examined it, then turned to the man. "Sir, do you have any identification showing you live here?" The man nodded and stepped back into the house. He returned a moment later with a piece of mail, holding it out for the officer to see. My stomach dropped when I caught sight of the address. It was my house, but the name on the envelope was his. "That's impossible," I whispered, my vision swimming. "That should have my name on it." The officer frowned, shifting uncomfortably. "Mom, are you sure this is the right address?" "Of course I am," I snapped, frustration overtaking my fear. "I have proof inside bills, my lease, personal belongings." The officer turned back to the man. "Would you mind if she steps inside to verify?" The man hesitated, his face unreadable, then nodded. I stepped past him cautiously, my heart pounding as I entered my own home, only it wasn't my home. The layout was the same, but every detail was wrong. The furniture, the pictures on the walls, even the faint scent in the air, nothing belonged to me. I walked toward the kitchen, expecting to see my coffee maker on the counter, my favorite mug in the sink. Instead, there were unfamiliar appliances, different dishes, and a collection of keys hanging on the wall, none of them mine. Panic swelled in my chest as I turned to the officers. "Everything is different. I don't know what's happening, but this isn't right." The man crossed his arms, watching me with an eerie calm. "Maybe you're confused," he said. "Maybe you made a mistake." "No," I whispered, my throat tightening. "I know my own home." One of the officers sighed, lowering his voice. "Mom, is there anyone we can call for you? A family member? A friend?" Anger flared through me. "I don't need anyone to call. I need you to believe me. This was my home this morning. Something isn't right." "Right." The officers exchanged glances, clearly uncertain. "We'll file a report, but from what we can see, there's no sign of a break-in and he has documentation." I turned back to the man, studying his face. He still looked calm, almost sympathetic, but there was something else lurking beneath his expression. A secret. A knowledge that I wasn't meant to understand. I stepped outside, my mind whirling. The police left after advising me to go somewhere safe for the night. I stood on the sidewalk, staring at the house that used to be mine, now occupied by someone else. As I walked away, I couldn't shake the feeling that I had slipped into a different version of reality. That somewhere, In another place, my real home still existed, but I was no longer part of it. Story 12. Babysitting for the Parkers was usually easy. Their son Noah was 6 years old, quiet and well-behaved. The house was large but cozy, nestled at the end of a long driveway surrounded by tall trees. I had watched him a few times before, and nothing strange had ever happened. That night, after putting Noah to bed, I settled on the couch with a movie. The baby monitor sat beside me, its small screen glowing in the dim light. Outside, the wind rustled through the trees, making the branches scratch against the windows. The house felt still, almost too quiet, but I told myself it was just my imagination. As I scrolled through my phone, a message popped up from Mrs. Parker. My stomach tensed as I read it, my fingers tightening around the device. It was a simple instruction, but something about it sent a shiver down my spine. I stared at the words for a long moment, feeling the air around me grow heavier. A slow, deliberate knock echoed through the house. My breath caught in my throat as I turned toward the front door. The knock came again, louder this time, rattling the door in its frame. I stayed frozen, my heart pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. The message from Mrs. Parker replayed in my mind, and I tightened my grip on my phone. I forced myself to stay seated, not daring to even peek through the peephole. Whoever was outside knocked once more, then went silent. The quiet stretched on for too long, making my skin crawl. I glanced at the baby monitor, half expecting to see something moving in Noah's room, but the screen showed only his small, sleeping form. A feeling of unease coiled in my stomach as I listened for any sign of movement outside. The trees swayed, their shadows shifting across the floor, but nothing else stirred. Just when I started to think the person had left, the doorknob rattled violently. A sharp gasp escaped my lips as I pressed myself deeper into the couch. Whoever was outside wasn't just knocking anymore, they were trying to get in. My pulse raced as I clenched my hands into fists, unsure of what to do. The locks held, but I didn't feel safe. My mind raced with possibilities, each one worse than the last. Was it a stranger? Someone the Parkers knew? Or was it just a prank? The silence that followed was even more unnerving, stretching out until it became unbearable. I forced myself to move, creeping toward the window as quietly as possible. My hands trembled as I lifted a sliver of the curtain, peering outside. The porch was empty, the front yard stretching into darkness, but something felt wrong. I could sense that I wasn't alone. A chill ran down my spine as I caught movement near the tree line. A figure stood just beyond the glow of the porch light, barely visible between the shadows. They didn't move, didn't step forward or retreat. They just stood there, watching. I shut the curtain, my breathing shallow as I backed away. My fingers hovered over my phone, debating whether to call the police. But then I remembered Noah upstairs, asleep and unaware. If I panicked, I might wake him, and that thought terrified me even more. Another knock came, softer this time, almost patient. It was as if whoever was out there knew I was inside, waiting. My stomach twisted as I pressed my back against the wall, wishing the night would just end. Time seemed to stretch, each second dragging on painfully slow. The minutes passed, and the knocking finally stopped. The house was eerily silent again, but I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. I forced myself to check the baby monitor again, relieved to see Noah still safe in bed. But then, something shifted on the screen. A shadow passed over the camera, just for a second. My breath hitched as I stared, waiting to see it again. The nursery door was closed. I had shut it myself, but now it looked slightly open. My hands shook as I grabbed the nearest object, a heavy candle holder, and crept upstairs. The hallway felt longer than I remembered, stretching endlessly before me. I held my breath as I reached Noah's door, pushing it open slowly. The room was dark, save for the faint blue glow from the monitor, casting eerie shapes on the walls. Noah was still asleep, his small form rising and falling with each breath. But the closet door was ajar, just enough to make my stomach drop. I knew it had been closed when I put him to bed. My grip tightened on the candle holder as I reached for the light switch. The bulb flickered before steadying, illuminating the room in a dull glow. I swallowed hard and stepped closer to the closet, my ears straining for any sound. The air inside felt colder, the shadows deeper, but there was nothing there. Just an empty space filled with neatly stacked toys. I let out a shaky breath and turned back to Noah, brushing his hair gently to reassure myself. Whatever had been outside, whatever had made my skin crawl, was gone now. At least, that's what I told myself as I closed the door and sat beside his bed. I stayed awake until the Parkers returned, unable to shake the lingering unease. When they walked in, Mrs. Parker gave me a questioning look, noticing my pale face. I hesitated before telling them everything, my voice barely above a whisper. Mr. Parker's expression darkened as he exchanged a glance with his wife. There was a pause, heavy and filled with unspoken words. Then Mrs. Parker finally spoke, her voice quiet but firm. They had been receiving strange knocks at night for the past week. They thought it was nothing, just harmless pranks from kids in the neighborhood. But the look in Mr. Parker's eyes told me he didn't believe that anymore. I gathered my things quickly, ready to leave, but as I stepped outside, I hesitated. The trees stood motionless, the night calm and undisturbed. But deep in my gut, I knew someone had been there, watching, waiting. And the worst part, I couldn't shake the feeling that they weren't done yet. Story 13. The car was a steel and old sedan with a few scratches, but the engine purred like new. I had bought it off a guy in a hurry to get rid of it, his price too good to pass up. The only odd thing was the trunk. It was locked, and he claimed he had lost the key. At first, I didn't think much of it. People lose keys all the time, and I figured I could have a locksmith take care of it later. But the more I drove the car, the more I found myself wondering about that trunk and what might be inside. After a few days, curiosity got the best of me. I tried everything, wiggling the lock, pulling at the edges, even attempting to pick it myself. Nothing worked, so I finally decided to force it open with a crowbar. The trunk groaned as the metal bent under pressure, the lock finally giving way with a sharp snap. A foul, overwhelming stench hit me immediately, so strong that I gagged and stumbled back. My hands trembled as I lifted the trunk lid all the way. Inside, a large black garbage bag sat crumpled against the side, its plastic stretched tight over something irregularly shaped. My gut twisted as I reached for it, my fingers hesitating over the damp, sticky surface. When I finally tore it open, the sight sent me reeling. A body, curled and bound, lay stiff inside the bag. The skin had turned an unnatural shade, bloated and sickly, as if it had been decaying for days. My breath came in sharp gasps as I scrambled away from the car, my mind struggling to process what I had just seen. I had to call the police, but my hands were shaking too hard to dial. My thoughts raced. Who was this? How did they end up in my trunk? Had the previous owner done this? Had I just bought a car that was part of something horrifying? Finally, I managed to call, my voice barely steady as I reported what I had found. The dispatcher's tone turned serious, asking me to stay where I was. Minutes stretched into eternity before sirens pierced the air, and soon officers swarmed my driveway. One of them took one look inside the trunk and grimaced. They quickly roped off the area, pushing me back as forensics arrived to process the scene. I felt like I was trapped in a nightmare, watching strangers handle the gruesome discovery from a distance. They took me in for questioning, my head still spinning as I sat in the small, sterile room at the station. They asked about the man who sold me the car, what I knew about him, where I had met him. I answered as best as I could, but the details were blurry, unimportant at the time of the sale. The detectives weren't saying much, their expressions unreadable. One of them left the room, returning minutes later with a grim look. "We ran the plates," he said. "This car was reported stolen a month ago." My stomach dropped. The seller had never mentioned that, never given me any reason to suspect something was wrong. But now, everything about the deal felt off: the rushed sale, the missing trunk key, the way he had barely looked me in the eye. The detectives kept me there for hours, piecing together whatever they could. They showed me a photograph of a missing person, a woman in her mid-30s, last seen 2 weeks ago. The weight in my gut grew heavier when they confirmed the body in my trunk was hers. They needed to find the man who sold me the car, but my description was vague. I had paid in cash, leaving no paper trail. The only thing I had was the location where we met, an empty lot outside of town. Days passed in a blur. My car, now a crime scene, was impounded for investigation. The police kept in touch, but updates were few. I couldn't sleep, haunted by the image of that lifeless body, wondering what kind of horror I had unknowingly driven around with. Then, a break came. Surveillance footage from a nearby gas station showed the man who had sold me the car. The police tracked him down, arresting him at a rundown motel a few towns over. His name was Eric Mathers, and he had a long record of violent offenses. The details that followed only made things worse. The woman had been reported missing after failing to show up to work. Her friends had been searching for her, unaware that she had been discarded in the trunk of a car now sitting in my driveway. Mathers refused to talk, but the evidence was overwhelming. DNA, fibers, surveillance footage, all of it tied him to the crime. The only thing he wouldn't reveal was why. That part I would never know. Even after the case was closed, I couldn't shake the horror of what had happened. I had bought a car without questioning its past, unknowingly taking possession of something much darker than I ever could have imagined. No matter how many times I told myself it wasn't my fault, I still felt the weight of it. I never got the car back, not that I wanted to. The police kept it for evidence, and I moved on, though the experience left me wary. Every time I see an old, abandoned car, I wonder what secrets it holds. And no matter how good a deal seems, I will never buy a used car without checking the trunk first. Story 14. I had been talking to him for a couple of weeks before agreeing to meet in person. His profile was well put together, his messages were charming, and he seemed genuinely interested in me. We decided on a casual dinner at his place since he claimed to be a great cook. I was hesitant at first, but convinced myself it would be fine as long as I stayed alert. When I arrived, his apartment looked normal, clean, well decorated, and nothing out of the ordinary. He greeted me with an easy smile, and I felt a little more at ease. The smell of food filled the air, and he guided me to the dining table where a meal was already set. I told myself I had been overly cautious for no reason. We ate and talked, and everything felt natural at first. He was attentive, asking me questions about my life, laughing at my jokes, and sharing interesting stories. But as the night went on, I started noticing little things that made me uneasy. The way he stared a little too long when I answered a question, or how he repeated my words under his breath like he was memorizing them. At one point I glanced at my phone, noticing how late it had gotten. I mentioned I should probably head home soon, but his expression changed. His smile remained, but his eyes darkened slightly as he leaned forward. "So soon?" he asked. We're having such a great time." I forced a polite smile and stood up, grabbing my bag. "Yeah, it's been fun, but I have an early morning," I said, trying to keep my tone light. I walked toward the door, expecting him to follow and let me out. Instead, I heard a quiet click behind me. I turned, my heart dropping as I saw him standing by the door, his hand on the lock. The smile was still on his face, but it felt different now. It wasn't warm or friendly, it was knowing. A quiet kind of confidence that sent a chill through me. "Why are you in such a rush?" he asked softly. I thought we were getting along. His voice was calm, too calm, and I felt my pulse hammering in my throat. I forced a laugh, trying to act like I wasn't unnerved. "I really do need to go," I said, shifting slightly toward the door. "I had a great time, though." My fingers twitched toward the handle, but he didn't move away. Instead, he let out a slow sigh and tilted his head. "You're acting like I'm some kind of threat," he said, his tone almost playful. "I just want to spend more time with you. What's wrong with that?" The way he phrased it made it sound so reasonable, but every instinct in my body screamed at me that something was very wrong. I took a slow breath, forcing myself to stay calm. "I appreciate that, but I really do have to go," I said, keeping my voice even. "Maybe we can meet up again another time." I hoped giving him an out would make him step aside. He didn't. Instead, he laughed softly, shaking his head. "You don't get it, do you?" he murmured. "I picked you for a reason. You're different." His fingers tapped idly against the doorframe, like he was considering something. I swallowed hard, my mind racing. I needed to get out, but he was between me and the door, and I had no idea what he was capable of. My phone was still in my bag, and I didn't want to make any sudden moves. Keeping my expression neutral, I took a step back. "Look, I'm flattered, but you're making me uncomfortable," I said firmly. "Please move." My voice was steady, but my hands were shaking. He let out a slow exhale, his eyes studying me. "You don't have to be afraid," he said. "I just want to keep talking." The way he said it made my skin crawl, like I was overreacting, like I should be grateful. I forced another step back, putting more space between us. "I need to go," I repeated, my voice sharper this time. I glanced toward the nearest window, considering if I could get to it in time. His smile faded slightly, and his fingers curled into a fist. "That's a shame," he murmured. "I thought you'd be different." His voice was almost disappointed, like I had let him down. My pulse pounded as I realized I had seconds to act. Before he could say anything else, I yanked my phone from my bag and hit the emergency dial. As soon as I did, his expression changed entirely. His jaw clenched, and for a split second, I saw something darker flicker across his face. Then, just as quickly, he sighed and stepped away from the door. "Fine," he said flatly. "If you're going to be dramatic about it, go." I didn't hesitate. I grabbed the handle, unlocked it, and stepped out as quickly as I could without running. I kept my breathing steady, not looking back until I was in the hallway. The door shut behind me, but I knew he was still watching. I hurried to the elevator, my heart still pounding, my hands shaking as I clutched my phone. When I reached the lobby, I told the front desk I needed a ride home immediately. They must have seen the look on my face because they didn't ask questions. The whole way home, I kept replaying everything in my mind. The shift in his voice, the way he blocked the door, the way he made me feel like I was being unreasonable for wanting to leave. I knew without a doubt that if I hadn't acted fast, things could have ended very differently. I blocked his number as soon as I got home, deleting the app and locking every door in my apartment. But even after I was safe inside, I couldn't shake the feeling that he had let me go too easily, like he had been testing me, and I had barely passed. Story 15. The first time I noticed him, I thought my eyes were playing tricks on me. The faint glow of the street lamp cast long shadows outside my house, and at first, he just seemed like another part of the darkness. But then I saw the glint of his eyes through the holes of his ski mask, fixed on me through the window. My breath caught in my throat as I realized he wasn't moving, just standing there, watching. A cold chill crept up my spine as I forced myself to look away. Maybe if I ignored him, he would leave, just some creep playing a prank. I reached for my phone, debating whether to call the police, but something held me back. It felt ridiculous to report a man just standing there, doing nothing but staring. Minutes passed, then an hour, yet he didn't move. Every time I glanced out, he was still there, motionless, like a statue frozen in the night. My skin prickled with unease as I turned off the lights, hoping he would think I had gone to bed. But even in the dark, I could feel his presence, an invisible weight pressing against my chest. Finally, I couldn't take it anymore. I grabbed my phone and dialed, my voice low and strained as I told the dispatcher what was happening. They assured me an officer would be sent over, but as I hung up, a terrible thought crossed my mind. What if he left before they arrived, disappearing into the night like he was never there? I peeked through the curtain again, half expecting him to be gone. But he wasn't. He was still there, standing as still as before, as if he knew I had called for help. My stomach twisted as I realized he wanted me to see him, to know that he wasn't in a hurry to leave. He was waiting for something. The minutes dragged by, each one stretching into eternity. My heart pounded against my ribs as I listened for any sound, any sign of movement. Then, at last, the distant wail of sirens broke through the silence, cutting through the night like a blade. Relief flooded my chest as I watched a patrol car pull up in front of my house. 2 officers stepped out, their flashlights scanning the yard. My hands trembled as I unlocked the door and waved them over, trying to keep my voice steady. "He was right there," I said, pointing to the spot near the window. But when I turned back, he was gone. My stomach dropped as the officers exchanged glances, their expressions unreadable. One of them stepped forward, shining his light around the yard, while the other turned to me. "Can you describe him?" he asked, his voice calm but firm. I swallowed hard, my mind scrambling for details beyond the mask and the way he just stood there. "He was tall, I think," I said, wearing a dark jacket, ski mask, just watching me. He didn't move for hours. My voice wavered as I forced myself to say the words out loud. The officer nodded, glancing toward his partner, who had started searching the area. The tension in the air was thick, pressing against my skin like a warning. I expected them to reassure me, to say it was probably nothing. Instead, the officer sighed and looked me straight in the eye. "We've seen him before," he said, his tone unreadable. A shiver ran down my spine as his words sank in. "What do you mean?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. The officer hesitated for a moment before answering. "There have been reports of a man matching this description in the area. Always outside windows, always watching." I felt my stomach churn as a wave of nausea hit me. "Did he ever do anything?" My voice was shaky, barely holding together. The officer didn't answer right away, but the way his jaw tightened told me enough. "He never breaks in," he finally said. "Never leaves anything behind, just watches. But he always comes back." The words felt like ice spreading through my veins. I wrapped my arms around myself, trying to shake the growing sense of dread. The second officer returned, shaking his head. "No sign of him," he said, "but he was definitely here." tracks in the grass. My breath hitched at the confirmation, the undeniable proof that I hadn't imagined it. He had been there, and he had left just before the police arrived. I forced myself to take a deep breath. "What should I do?" I asked, my voice barely steady. The first officer's expression softened slightly. "Keep your doors and windows locked. If he comes back, call us immediately." He handed me his card, the weight of it feeling heavier than it should. I watched as they drove off, their headlights disappearing into the night. The house felt different now, like the walls weren't enough to keep the outside world away. Every shadow seemed to stretch too far. Every creak in the floorboards made my pulse jump. I barely slept that night, jolting awake at every imagined sound. The next day, I installed new locks, double-checked every window, and even set up cameras around the house. But no matter how much I tried to feel safe, the thought kept gnawing at the back of my mind. The police knew him. They had seen him before, and they knew he would come back. Days passed, then weeks, and there was no sign of him. I told myself it was over, that maybe he had moved on to somewhere else. But every night, as I passed by the window, I found myself glancing outside, searching for a shadow that wasn't supposed to be there. Then, one night I woke up with a start, a deep, uneasy feeling settling in my chest. The room was silent, but something felt off. Slowly, I turned my head toward the window, my heart pounding in my ears. And there he was, standing in the same spot as before, staring through the glass. This time I didn't wait. My hands fumbled for my phone as I called the police, my voice barely able to form the words. He didn't move, didn't react, just stood there, as if he had all the time in the world. By the time the officers arrived, he was gone again. Just like before, only footprints remained, leading off into the night. The same officer from before met my eyes, his expression grim. "We'll do everything we can," he said. But even as he spoke, I could tell he didn't believe this was over. And neither did I. Story 16. Moving into a new apartment was supposed to be a fresh start. The place was small but cozy, with high ceilings and large windows that let in just the right amount of light. The previous tenant had left in a hurry, according to the landlord, but I didn't think much of it at the time. As I unpacked, I noticed something odd about the bookshelf in the living room. It was an old wooden piece, heavy and slightly uneven, but it didn't sit flush against the wall. A thin line of shadow suggested a gap, just enough to spark my curiosity. I pulled the shelf forward, and to my surprise, it swung outward like a door. Behind it was a narrow passageway shrouded in darkness, with a faint smell of dust and damp wood. What sent a chill down my spine were the footprints in the thin layer of dust, fresh ones, leading inside. I hesitated, my breath quickening as I stared at the tracks. Someone had been here recently, though I had locked the apartment when I arrived. Swallowing my fear, I grabbed my phone for light and stepped into the passage. The air was thick, and the walls were lined with peeling wallpaper, revealing aged wooden planks underneath. The footprints led deeper, disappearing around a bend, and I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Every step echoed slightly, making the space feel smaller than it was. I followed the path, careful not to make too much noise, my heart pounding in my chest. The hallway led to a small, dusty room with an old wooden chair in the center. On the far wall, there was another door partially open, revealing another darkened space beyond. I turned back, considering leaving and sealing the passage for good, but a faint noise, a whisper or a breath, made me freeze. It came from the open doorway ahead, and for a moment, I considered calling out, but fear kept my mouth shut. I took a step forward, shining my light into the next room. It was empty except for a pile of tattered blankets in the corner, as if someone had been living there. A chill ran through me as I spotted a small notebook lying beside the makeshift bed. Picking it up, I flipped through the pages, my fingers trembling. The writing was hurried and erratic, mentioning strange noises, hidden doors, and someone watching from the shadows. The last entry was the most disturbing. It simply read, "I hear them at night. They are in the walls." A sudden creak behind me made me spin around, my heart slamming against my ribs. The wooden chair in the previous room had shifted slightly, as if someone had just stood up. My light wavered as I scanned the space, but I saw nothing. Panic set in, and I bolted back down the passage, my footsteps thudding against the wooden floor. I reached the bookshelf, shoving it back into place with shaking hands, sealing whatever was in there away. I leaned against it, trying to catch my breath. That night, I barely slept, my mind replaying what I had seen. The fresh footprints, the blankets, the notebook, it all pointed to someone else living there. But the thought that unnerved me most was the last entry. Was it just paranoia, or had they really heard something in the walls? Over the next few days, I couldn't shake the unease that settled over me. Every creak and groan of the apartment made my skin crawl. I kept the bookshelf firmly in place, but I couldn't stop imagining what might still be inside. One evening, as I sat on the couch trying to distract myself, I heard a soft rustling sound, coming from the direction of the hidden passage. My blood turned cold as I realized it wasn't the usual sounds of the old building settling. It was coming from behind the bookshelf. I stood slowly, my heart hammering as I edged closer. Pressing my ear against the wood, I held my breath, listening. A faint scratching sound came from within, deliberate and slow, as if someone or something was moving just beyond the wall. I stumbled back, grabbing my phone with trembling hands. I had to leave. My instincts screamed at me to get out before I found out what was making that sound. I grabbed my keys and yanked open the front door, stepping into the safety of the hallway. I called the landlord, demanding an explanation for the hidden passage. There was a long pause before he sighed, sounding reluctant. He admitted that the previous tenant had disappeared without a trace, leaving everything behind. The police had investigated but found no evidence of foul play. I knew then that I couldn't stay. I returned the next morning with a friend to gather my things, keeping a wary eye on the bookshelf the entire time. Nothing seemed out of place, but the sense of being watched never left me. As we carried out the last of my boxes, my friend paused, staring at the floor near the bookshelf. Fresh footprints in the dust leading out of the passage, not in. I felt the blood drain from my face as I realized what that meant. Something had come out while I was gone. I slammed the apartment door shut behind me and never looked back. Whatever was inside that hidden passage, it wasn't my problem anymore. But even now, I still wake up at night, wondering if it ever left or if it's still waiting in the walls for someone else to find its door. Story 17. Working the night shift at St. Mary's Hospital was usually quiet, aside from the occasional emergency. Most of the long hours were spent monitoring patients, adjusting IV drips, and completing paperwork. I had done this routine for years, and nothing surprised me anymore until that night. At around 2:30 a.m., I made my rounds, checking on each patient in the West Wing. When I reached room 306, I found Mr. Alderman sitting up in bed. He was an elderly man admitted 2 nights ago for pneumonia, and despite his frail condition, he was alert. We chatted briefly, his raspy voice thanking me for bringing him water before I moved on. I continued my checks and returned to the nurse's station where I updated the charts. About 15 minutes later, I remembered I had forgotten to leave Mr. Alderman's next dose of medication on his bedside tray. Sighing, I grabbed the small paper cup of pills and walked back to his room, expecting to see him resting. The room was empty. The bed was neatly made, the IV stand was gone, and the heart monitor had been removed. Confused, I checked the bathroom, but the door was wide open and the light was off. The room looked as if no one had been there at all. A chill ran through me as I backed out into the hallway, my mind racing. I had just spoken to him not even 20 minutes ago. Patients weren't discharged in the middle of the night, and even if they were, there would be paperwork and a nurse escorting them out. I hurried back to the nurse's station, trying to steady my breathing. "Hey, did they move Mr. Alderman?" I asked my coworker Clara, who was sipping coffee at her desk. She frowned and checked the computer. "Mr. Alderman? He passed away earlier today, around noon." My stomach dropped. "No, that's not right," I said, shaking my head. "I just spoke to him a few minutes ago. He was sitting up in bed." Clara gave me a strange look before turning the screen toward me. The records were clear. Mr. Alderman had been pronounced dead at 12:17 p.m. His body transferred to the morgue shortly after. A wave of cold dread washed over me. I knew what I had seen, what I had heard. His voice thanking me, his tired but warm expression. It wasn't a dream, and I wasn't imagining things. He had been there. Refusing to accept it, I retraced my steps to room 306, standing in the doorway with my heart pounding. The room was still empty, but something felt different now. The air was heavier, colder, as if something unseen lingered in the space. A shadow flickered across the far wall, and I swear I heard a faint, wheezing breath. I forced myself to step inside, scanning the room for anything out of place. The bedside table was wiped clean, no sign of the water cup I had given him. The window was closed, the blinds drawn. But as I turned to leave, I noticed something that made my blood run cold, a single indentation on the pillow, as if someone had been lying there moments before. A chill crept down my spine as I backed away, my hands trembling. I had to be losing my mind, but deep down I knew the truth. Mr. Alderman had been here, or at least a part of him had. I hurried back to the nurse's station and tried to act normal, but Clara noticed my pale face. "You okay?" she asked. I hesitated, then shook my head. I stopped, unsure how to explain it without sounding insane. "Never mind." For the rest of my shift, I avoided room 306, but I couldn't shake the uneasy feeling pressing against my chest. Every time I walked past the door, I swore I could feel eyes on me. The air around it was always colder, and I could almost hear faint whispers carried through the silence of the hospital halls. When morning finally came, I grabbed my bag and left as fast as I could. But before I stepped into the elevator, I glanced back down the hallway one last time. My breath caught in my throat. Standing in the doorway of room 306 was a figure, a shadowy outline, just barely visible in the dim light. It didn't move, didn't speak, it only watched. The elevator doors closed before I could react, and I stumbled back against the wall, my heart pounding. When I finally got to my car, I sat in silence, gripping the steering wheel as I tried to process what had happened. Had Mr. Alderman stayed behind? Had he been trying to say goodbye? Or had I simply seen something I was never meant to see? The next night, I was hesitant to return to work, but I convinced myself it had all been exhaustion playing tricks on me. Yet as soon as I stepped onto the floor, I felt it again, that strange, heavy presence. I kept my head down, forcing myself to move through my rounds as if nothing had happened. When I finally reached room 306, I hesitated. The door was slightly ajar, and my pulse quickened as I reached for the handle. Pushing it open, I found the room empty once more, its silence deafening. But something was different. On the bedside table, where there had been nothing before, sat a small folded note. My hands trembled as I picked it up. The paper was old, yellowed at the edges, and the handwriting was unsteady. 3 simple words stared back at me. "Thank you, nurse." I stumbled backward, nearly dropping the note as my breath came in quick gasps. The room remained silent, but the air around me felt lighter, almost peaceful. It was as if finally Mr. Alderman had found his way. I never spoke about that night to anyone, and I never saw him again. But every time I passed room 306, I would pause, just for a moment. Not out of fear, but out of quiet respect for the patient who never left. Story 18. I had been driving for hours, the hum of the highway lulling me into a trance. The gas station I pulled into was nearly empty, just a single car parked by the convenience store. As I stepped out to pump gas, a man approached, his hands tucked into the pockets of his faded jacket. "Hey," he said, nodding toward my car. "You've got a flat tire." His voice was casual, but something about the way he lingered made me uneasy. I glanced at my tires, but from where I stood, they all looked fine. "Are you sure?" I asked, stepping back toward my car. He nodded, gesturing toward the rear passenger side. My gut told me to ignore him, but doubt crept in as I considered the possibility. I finished pumping gas and hesitated before checking the tire. When I crouched down to get a closer look, I heard movement behind me. Turning my head slightly, I caught a glimpse of him standing too close, his breath audible in the quiet night. My skin prickled as I straightened up. "It looks fine," I said, forcing a casual tone. His expression didn't change, but he didn't step back either. The way he watched me, as if studying my reaction, made my pulse quicken. "You sure?" he asked, tilting his head. "Sometimes you can't tell until you drive a little." His smile was thin, his eyes shadowed under the flickering gas station lights. Something in my chest tightened. I reached for my car door, determined to leave. "Yeah, I'm good," I said, keeping my tone light. He didn't move, but I could feel the shift in his demeanor, like a hunter realizing its prey was getting away. As I slid into the driver's seat and locked the door, he took a step closer. I turned the key, my hands slick against the steering wheel. My car rumbled to life, but before I could shift into drive, I saw him move. He darted toward the back of my car, disappearing from my mirrors. My stomach twisted as I glanced over my shoulder, but he was gone. The lot was empty except for his car near the store. Heart pounding, I pressed the gas and pulled away, but as I reached the exit, I saw movement in my side mirror. He had stepped out from behind the gas station, watching me as I drove off. I forced myself to breathe, gripping the wheel tighter. The highway stretched ahead, dark and empty. I told myself it was over, that he was just a guy messing with me, but my nerves wouldn't settle. A few miles down the road, a loud thumping noise filled my car. My chest clenched as I realized what it was. One of my tires was actually flat. I eased onto the shoulder, my hands trembling. My headlights cast a dim glow on the road ahead, but the darkness beyond felt suffocating. I checked my phone, no signal. A wave of dread settled over me. I had no choice but to change the tire myself. My trunk creaked as I opened it, pulling out the spare and jack. Every sound felt magnified in the empty night. As I crouched beside my car, I felt it again, that unsettling sensation of being watched. My skin crawled as I turned my head, scanning the darkness. Then I saw it. A pair of headlights appeared in the distance, growing closer. My stomach knotted as the car slowed. The shape was familiar. It was the same car from the gas station. Panic surged through me as I scrambled to my feet. My hands shook as I fumbled with my keys, rushing to get back inside. The car rolled to a stop a few feet behind mine. The driver's door opened and the man stepped out. He stood there, silhouetted by his headlights. "Told you it was flat," he called, his voice carrying over the quiet night. I forced myself to stay calm, my fingers tightening around my keys. "I've got it handled," I said, keeping my voice steady. My heartbeat roared in my ears as he took a slow step forward. "You sure?" he asked, just like before. But this time there was something else in his voice. Amusement. He had been waiting for this. My breathing quickened as I weighed my options. I could try to run, but where? The highway was endless darkness. My only chance was my car. He took another step, and that was all I needed. I wrenched my door open and slammed it shut, locking it in one swift motion. My hands fumbled to start the engine. He reached for my door handle, testing it. A sick smile stretched across his face as he knocked on the window. "Need some help?" he asked. I threw the car into drive, my tires skidding against the asphalt. The thumping of the flat tire was deafening, but I didn't care. I just needed to get away. In my mirror, I saw him standing there watching me go. Then, to my horror, he turned back to his car. His headlights flipped on, and he pulled onto the road. He was following me. A cold fear gripped my chest as I pressed the gas pedal harder. My car struggled with the damaged tire, but I couldn't stop. The highway stretched on, no signs of another vehicle in sight. I prayed for a town, a gas station, anything. The glow of distant lights flickered ahead, hope surging through me. I wasn't alone out here. As I neared the town, the car behind me slowed. I risked a glance in my mirror. He was still there, but he wasn't following anymore. Instead, he pulled onto a side road and vanished into the darkness. Relief crashed over me as I sped toward the nearest gas station. I parked under the bright lights, my hands shaking too hard to even turn off the ignition. It took a long time for my heart to settle. When I finally got out, my legs felt weak. The station attendant came outside, noticing my tire. "Need help with that?" he asked. I almost said no out of instinct, but then I nodded. "Yeah," I breathed. "That would be great." As he grabbed the tools, I scanned the road behind me, half expecting to see those headlights again. But the man was gone. For now. Story 19. I was brushing my hair when my phone rang, my best friend's name flashing across the screen. It was late, and she never called me this time of night, unless it was something important. The second I picked up, I could hear the fear in her breathing, short and uneven. Before I could say anything, she spoke, her voice shaking. She was whispering, her words rushed and frantic, saying that someone was outside her apartment. I asked her if she had locked the doors, if she had called the police, but she barely got a response out before the call cut off. The silence that followed sent a chill down my spine. I called her back immediately, my fingers trembling against the screen. The call didn't go through. A robotic voice told me the number had been disconnected, and I stared at my phone in disbelief. That didn't make sense. How could her number suddenly be out of service? I tried again, hoping it was some kind of mistake, but the same message played. Panic set in as I grabbed my car keys and rushed out the door. She lived only 10 minutes away, and I barely registered the drive, my mind racing with worst-case scenarios. Her voice kept replaying in my head, the way she had sounded so desperate. Something was wrong, and I had to get to her. When I pulled up to her apartment building, everything seemed normal. The parking lot was mostly empty, a few lights still on in some of the units. I rushed to her door and knocked hard, my heart hammering in my chest. There was no answer, no sound from inside. I tried calling her name, pressing my ear against the door, listening for any sign of movement. It was completely silent, too silent. I knocked again, harder this time, but still nothing. My gut told me something was very wrong. I checked the windows, hoping to see some sign of her inside. The blinds were drawn, but through a small gap, I could see the light was still on. If she was home, why wasn't she answering? My fingers hovered over my phone, debating whether to call the police. Before I could, I heard a noise behind me. A soft shuffle, the faintest hint of movement near the stairwell. I turned quickly, my breath catching in my throat. The hallway was empty, but I could feel that someone was watching me. I knocked one last time before deciding I needed help. My instincts were screaming at me to leave, but I couldn't just abandon her. I called the police, explaining the situation as calmly as I could. They told me to stay put and that they would send someone over. Minutes passed like hours as I stood outside her door, glancing over my shoulder every few seconds. The longer I waited, the stronger the feeling of being watched grew. My skin crawled, the hairs on my arms standing on end. I wanted to believe it was just my paranoia, but deep down I knew better. Finally, red and blue lights flashed outside, and 2 officers stepped out of their patrol car. I met them halfway, explaining everything again from the phone call to the disconnected number. They listened carefully before heading to her door, knocking firmly. Like before, there was no response. One of the officers tried the doorknob, and to my surprise, it turned. The door swung open slowly, revealing the dimly lit apartment inside. My stomach dropped as I followed them in, my breath held tight in my chest. The place was eerily quiet, everything seemingly in its place except for her phone, sitting on the kitchen counter. The screen was shattered, as if it had been dropped. One of the officers picked it up, frowning as he examined it. There was no sign of a struggle, no overturned furniture, no blood, just an empty apartment, and a lingering sense of something terribly wrong. I kept waiting for her to walk out of the bedroom, to tell me this was all a misunderstanding. But she never did. The officers checked every room, finding nothing. Her bed was made, her shoes neatly lined by the door, her purse still sitting on the table. It was as if she had just vanished. My mind struggled to process it, to make sense of something that didn't make sense. The police asked me for more details, but I had nothing useful to give them. I repeated her words, her panic, the way the call had suddenly ended. They took her phone as evidence, promising to investigate further. I stood there, feeling helpless, unsure of what to do next. I went home that night, but I didn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard her voice, the fear in it, the way it had been cut off mid-sentence. I tried calling her again the next morning, hoping, praying that somehow she would pick up, but the number was still disconnected. Days passed with no answers. The police found nothing, no sign of forced entry, no security footage showing anything unusual. It was as if she had simply walked out of her apartment and disappeared into thin air. But I knew that wasn't true. She had been afraid. She had called me for help. Weeks later, her case was classified as a missing person investigation, but with no leads, it quickly went cold. Her family was devastated, their grief mirrored in my own. I kept thinking about that phone call, the way she had sounded so certain that someone was outside her place. If she had been taken, why had there been no struggle, no signs of anything wrong? One night, unable to sleep, I scrolled through my call logs, staring at her name. I clicked on the last call, listening to the silence on the other end. But then, something strange happened. A faint static sound crackled through the speaker, followed by a single broken whisper. My name. I dropped the phone, my entire body going cold. The call had been disconnected, her number out of service, so how was there anything still there? I picked the phone back up, pressing it to my ear, but the line had gone dead. My hand shook as I checked the timestamp. The recording hadn't been there before. I didn't know what to believe anymore. Maybe I had imagined it, maybe it was just interference, but deep down, I knew the truth. She was out there, somewhere, and she was still trying to reach me. Story 20. I stepped into the restroom at the gas station, grateful for a quick break from my long drive. The place smelled of industrial cleaner, and the flickering fluorescent light overhead buzzed softly. Locking the door behind me, I took a deep breath, splashed some water on my face, and tried to shake off the exhaustion creeping in. After washing my hands, I turned the knob to leave, but the door didn't budge. I frowned and tried again, twisting it harder, expecting it to give way. It stayed firmly shut, the metal latch refusing to slide free. My pulse picked up as I jiggled the knob, realizing the lock wasn't stuck. It was as if something on the other side was holding it shut. A chill crept down my spine when I heard a deep, slow breath just beyond the door. It wasn't the normal sound of someone standing nearby, shifting or rustling their clothes. This was deliberate, drawn-out breathing, as though someone was listening. My heart hammered in my chest as I pressed my ear against the door, hoping I had imagined it. The breathing stopped, replaced by silence so thick it made my skin prickle. I swallowed hard and knocked against the door, forcing a shaky laugh. "Hey, door's stuck. Can you help?" I called, hoping it was just some clueless passerby. The silence stretched on, and a creeping dread pooled in my stomach. I banged harder, my nerves fraying with each second. "Hello?" I called again, but there was still no response. The only sound was the distant hum of a car pulling into the gas station outside. My hands trembled as I grabbed my phone, only to see the signal bar flashing empty. Shaking off the unease, I turned back to the door and braced myself, ready to yank it open. I twisted the knob with all my strength, but it barely moved. A bead of sweat slid down my temple as panic set in. Then, suddenly, there was a soft click from the lock, as if someone had flicked it from the outside. My breath hitched as the knob slowly, agonizingly started to turn on its own. I jerked back, pressing myself against the sink, my body going rigid. The air felt heavy, suffocating, as if the walls were pressing in around me. The knob twisted fully, but the door remained shut, as if whoever or whatever was outside wanted me to know they could get in if they wanted. I clenched my fists, willing myself to breathe normally, to think rationally. Maybe someone was messing with me, some bored traveler pulling a prank. I took a shaky step toward the door, then stopped as the breathing started again, closer this time. It wasn't just outside the door, it was right up against it. A cold, damp sensation spread across my palms as I clenched the sink behind me. "Who's there?" I forced out, my voice cracking. No answer came, just the steady inhale and exhale, unhurried, as though savoring the moment. I reached for my pocket, fingers fumbling for anything sharp, but all I had was my car key. The air thickened, pressing against my chest as I fought the urge to scream. The knob twisted again, harder this time, rattling as if someone was getting impatient. My breath came in short gasps as I yanked at the door with all my might, ignoring the sting in my fingers. Then, without warning, the knob snapped back into place with a sharp clack. I stood frozen, heart pounding so hard it echoed in my ears. The breathing had stopped. I strained to listen, but the only sound was the distant murmur of the gas station's radio playing an old song. I waited, half expecting something to slam against the door, but nothing happened. With a shaking hand, I reached for the knob once more, turning it slowly, bracing myself for resistance. This time it turned with ease, the door swinging open effortlessly. The hallway outside was empty, eerily still, as if no one had ever been there. My legs felt weak as I stumbled out, scanning the small, dimly lit station for any sign of movement. The gas station attendant stood behind the counter, flipping through a magazine, completely oblivious to my terror. My voice felt dry when I finally spoke. "Hey, was anyone else just in here?" The man barely looked up, shaking his head. "Not in the last hour. It's been dead all night." I swallowed hard, glancing toward the bathroom door, half expecting it to slam shut on its own. The air inside still felt suffocating, pressing against the open doorway like an invisible force. I forced a nod and backed away, my pulse still racing as I headed for my car. The moment I stepped outside, the crisp night air wrapped around me like a lifeline. My hands trembled as I unlocked my car, heart still hammering in my chest. As I slid into the driver's seat and started the engine, I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. The rearview mirror reflected nothing but darkness, yet a strange heaviness filled the car, pressing against my shoulders. I forced myself to breathe, gripping the steering wheel until my knuckles ached. I wasn't going to stay here another second. Pulling out of the station, I tried to convince myself it was nothing a stuck door, a trick of my tired mind. But as I glanced one last time at the gas station disappearing in my rearview, I saw it. A shadow standing just outside the bathroom door, watching me leave. Story 21. I woke up to a low, guttural growl. My dog, Max, was standing rigid at the foot of my bed, his ears pricked forward, his body tense. The sound was unlike anything I had heard from him before, a deep warning that sent a chill down my spine. I followed his gaze and saw he was fixated on my closet door, which was slightly ajar. My heart pounded as I slowly sat up, my breath shallow. The closet door had been closed when I went to bed, I was sure of it. I tried to dismiss it as my imagination, but Max's continued growling made that impossible. I reached over to turn on the lamp, my hands trembling. The soft glow illuminated my room, but the light only made my fear worse. The crack in the closet door was wider than I remembered, as if it had been nudged open just a bit more. The darkness inside seemed too deep, too hollow. I swallowed hard and swung my legs over the side of the bed, my feet touching the cool wooden floor. Max's growling intensified as I moved closer to the closet. My fingers hovered over the handle, my pulse racing so fast it felt like my chest might explode. I took a deep breath and in one swift motion, yanked the door open. My stomach dropped as my eyes adjusted to the dimness inside. A man stood there, motionless, his eyes locked onto mine, unblinking, his breathing eerily steady. He was tall, with disheveled hair and a gaunt face, his clothes wrinkled as if he had been hiding there for a long time. My throat tightened, my body frozen in sheer terror. Max lunged forward, barking ferociously, his teeth bared. The man didn't flinch at first, simply watching me with an expression that was neither afraid nor aggressive, just unsettlingly calm. Then, as if suddenly realizing he had been caught, he took a step forward, forcing me to stumble back. I scrambled toward the nightstand, yanking open the drawer where I kept my phone. My fingers fumbled with the screen as I tried to dial emergency services. Max barked and snapped at the man's legs, keeping him from moving further into the room. My mind raced, every thought jumbled and frantic. The call connected, and I barely managed to stammer out my address before the man suddenly lunged. He shoved past Max, sending the dog skidding across the floor, and bolted toward my bedroom door. I barely processed what was happening before my instincts kicked in, and I chased after him. He sprinted down the hallway, his footsteps heavy against the hardwood. I watched as he reached the front door, and without hesitation, twisted the knob and flung it open. The cold night air rushed in as he disappeared into the darkness beyond. I stood there, panting, my whole body shaking. Max ran to my side, his body still tense, his eyes locked on the open door. I wanted to chase after the man, to see where he went, but my legs refused to move. The only thing I could do was wait for the police to arrive. Minutes felt like hours as I stood frozen in my living room. Every shadow outside seemed like it could be him, lurking, waiting. The image of his vacant stare burned into my mind, the way he had just been standing there, hidden in my closet while I slept. The flashing red and blue lights outside jolted me out of my paralysis. I ran to the door, relief washing over me as I saw the officers step out of their patrol car. I barely registered their questions as I tried to recount what had just happened. My words felt distant, as though I were talking about someone else's nightmare, not my own. The police searched the house thoroughly, checking every room, every possible hiding place. They confirmed that the man was gone, but found something that made my blood run cold. Inside the closet, tucked into the corner, was a small pile of food wrappers, a half-empty water bottle, and a blanket. He had been living in my home. I felt sick, the realization hitting me like a punch to the gut. How long had he been there? Had he watched me while I slept? Had he moved around while I was out during the day? The officers tried to reassure me, but their words felt hollow. They took statements and promised to patrol the area for the rest of the night. They advised me to stay somewhere else until I could change my locks and secure my windows. The thought of staying there, even for one more night, was unbearable. I grabbed a bag, stuffing it with essentials while Max paced anxiously beside me. Every creak of the house made my heart jump. Every gust of wind outside made me flinch. I kept expecting to see the man's face appear in the window, watching, waiting for me to let my guard down. I drove to my brother's house, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. The whole way there, I checked my rearview mirror over and over, half expecting to see headlights trailing me. When I finally arrived, my brother took one look at my face and pulled me into the house without asking questions. Sleep was impossible that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw him standing there in the closet, his eyes empty, his presence an intrusion into the most private part of my life. The knowledge that he had been there for who knows how long made my skin crawl. I felt violated in a way I couldn't describe. The police never found him. They checked security cameras in the area, but there was no clear footage of him leaving my property. It was as if he had vanished into thin air. They suspected he was a drifter, someone looking for shelter, but that explanation didn't bring me any comfort. Even after changing my locks, installing security cameras, and reinforcing my windows, I never truly felt safe in my home again. The idea that someone had been living in my space, watching me, hiding just a few feet away as I slept, haunted me. Every time I passed the closet, I felt a cold dread settle in my chest. I eventually moved out, unable to shake the feeling that he would come back. Maybe he had found a new place to hide, a new closet to disappear into. Or maybe, somewhere out there, he was still watching, waiting for another chance to step out of the darkness. Story 22. The road stretched endlessly before me, a dark ribbon cutting through miles of empty land. I had been driving for hours, my headlights slicing through the night, illuminating nothing but trees and the occasional road sign. The hum of the engine and the rhythmic whir of the tires against the pavement were the only sounds keeping me company. It was late, and I was exhausted, but I was determined to make it home without stopping. The highway was nearly deserted, only a few distant taillights appearing now and then before fading into the darkness. I kept my hand steady on the wheel, trying to ignore the creeping sense of unease settling in my chest. There was something unnatural about how empty the road felt, how the silence seemed thicker than usual. I told myself it was just the late hour playing tricks on me. The air in the car felt heavier, and despite the cool night breeze seeping in through the cracked window, a bead of sweat rolled down my temple. I reached over to adjust the air conditioning, glancing briefly at the rearview mirror. For a second, I thought I saw movement in the back seat, but when I looked again, it was empty. My breath came out shaky as I forced my eyes back to the road. Just as I tried to shake off the feeling, a sharp clicking sound echoed through the car. My entire body tensed as I recognized it instantly. It was the unmistakable sound of my back door unlocking. My fingers clenched the steering wheel, my heartbeat hammering against my ribs. I swallowed hard, refusing to look in the mirror again. My mind scrambled for a logical explanation, but none made sense. I had locked the doors the moment I got in the car. There was no way it could have opened on its own. The road ahead felt endless, and stopping was the last thing I wanted to do. My skin prickled as I reached toward the controls, locking the doors again with shaky fingers. I kept my foot steady on the gas, forcing myself to breathe evenly. If someone was back there, I didn't want to let them know I was aware. Minutes passed, stretching unbearably long. My ears strained to hear any noise from the back seat, but there was only silence. The paranoia in my chest twisted tighter, making every shadow on the road feel like something watching me. My pulse pounded so loudly that I almost didn't hear it, the slow, deliberate sound of breathing behind me. My throat went dry as my fingers tightened around the wheel. I could feel the weight of something in the car with me, something that shouldn't have been there. Every muscle in my body screamed for me to look, but I kept my eyes locked on the road. If I acknowledged it, what would happen next? The air in the car felt colder, pressing against my skin like a warning. My hands were trembling as I tried to focus on driving, the yellow lines on the road blurring under the harsh glare of my headlights. Another breath, slow and measured, sounded from the back seat. It was so close, too close. I forced myself to stay calm, to think. If I pulled over, I'd be alone on an empty stretch of highway with no one to help me. If I kept driving, I had to endure the knowledge that something or someone was right behind me. The thought made my stomach twist painfully. My mind raced for a plan as I spotted an upcoming exit. There was a gas station there, one of the few open this late at night. If I could make it, I wouldn't be alone anymore. I pressed my foot down on the gas, gripping the wheel so tightly my knuckles ached. As the exit approached, a new sound sent ice through my veins. The slow creak of the back door easing open. I felt the rush of cold air as the wind howled through the opening. I barely had time to react before the door slammed shut again with force. My body jolted, and the car swerved slightly before I steadied it. Panic clawed at my throat as I pulled into the gas station's brightly lit lot. I parked as close to the entrance as possible, my breath coming in uneven gasps. I hesitated for only a moment before turning around, dreading what I might see. The back seat was empty. The door was locked, just as I had set it. Nothing looked out of place, but the air still felt wrong. It was thick with something unseen, something that had been there moments ago but was now gone. My skin crawled as I grabbed my phone with shaky hands. I stepped out of the car, scanning the lot for any sign of movement. The gas station was quiet, only a lone attendant inside cleaning the counter. The night stretched out around me, dark and silent, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was still being watched. I forced myself to breathe, rubbing my arms as I walked into the station. The bright fluorescent lights should have made me feel safer, but they didn't. I grabbed a bottle of water, just for something to do, my mind racing with what had just happened. The attendant barely glanced at me as I approached the counter. He looked tired, indifferent, like he had seen too many travelers come and go. But as he rang me up, his eyes flicked toward the door, then back to me. His expression changed just slightly, his tired gaze sharpening. Came from the highway. His voice was casual, but something about the way he asked made my stomach tighten. I nodded slowly, suddenly unsure if I wanted to talk about it. He let out a small breath, shaking his head before handing me my change. "You're not the first." My fingers curled around the money, my pulse spiking again. "The first what?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. He hesitated, then leaned slightly closer. "People driving through here at night, sometimes they hear things, feel things." His eyes flicked toward my car, his jaw tightening. "Sometimes the ones who stop say they heard someone in the backseat." I swallowed hard, glancing back at my car parked under the harsh lights. The back door remained shut, locked tight, as if nothing had ever happened. But deep in my gut, I knew better. Something had been there, and now I wasn't sure if it had truly left. Story 23. I came home late, exhausted from a long day at work. As I pulled into my driveway, everything looked normal, porch light on, curtains drawn just as I had left them. I fished my keys from my pocket, unlocked the front door, and stepped inside. The moment I entered, something felt off. The air smelled different, like a faint trace of unfamiliar cologne mixed with something metallic. I reached for the light switch, and as the warm glow filled the room, my breath caught in my throat. My furniture was rearranged. The couch, usually against the far wall, now faced the window. The coffee table had been pushed to the side, and my bookshelf stood at an odd angle, as if someone had been interrupted while moving it. My heart pounded as my eyes scanned the room for more changes. Then I saw it. A single sheet of paper sat in the center of my kitchen table. It was positioned too perfectly, as if it had been deliberately placed for me to find. I stepped closer, hesitating before reading the words written in bold, precise handwriting, "Misplace." A chill crawled up my spine. I turned in slow circles, scanning every corner of my home. The door had been locked when I arrived. There were no broken windows, no signs of forced entry. Whoever had done this had a way in, and worse, they had left without a trace. I reached for my phone, my fingers trembling as I dialed. But before I pressed call, a thought made my stomach drop. If the intruder had rearranged my furniture, had they touched anything else? My bedroom, my closet, my personal belongings, had they gone through them too? I forced myself to move, stepping cautiously down the hall. My bedroom door stood slightly ajar, just as I had left it, but something was off. The bed was made perfectly, tighter than I ever arranged it. My dresser drawers were open by an inch, each one aligned too neatly. Swallowing hard, I inched forward and peeked inside my closet. My clothes hung just as they always did, but my shoes were out of order. The usual pattern was broken, with my boots now at the front instead of the back. Someone had been here, moving through my most private space. I backed out of the room, my breath coming in short, sharp gasps. My skin prickled as though I were being watched. Every instinct screamed at me to leave, but another part of me needed answers. I rushed to check the windows, finding each one locked. The back door was bolted shut. How had they gotten in? As I stood in the middle of my disarranged living room, an eerie realization hit me. The note wasn't a threat, it was a statement. Whoever had been here wasn't trying to scare me. They were observing, studying, and worst of all, they had taken their time. A sudden noise made me freeze. A soft creak, like weight shifting on a floorboard. It came from the hallway. My mouth went dry as I turned toward the sound, my pulse hammering in my ears. I wasn't alone. I forced my feet to move, creeping toward the noise. The hall light flickered slightly, casting shifting shadows against the walls. I reached my bathroom and nudged the door open with the tip of my shoe. Empty. Then another sound. A whisper of movement from the guest bedroom. My stomach twisted, fear nearly paralyzing me. I gripped my phone tighter and stepped toward the room, pushing the door open with one shaky hand. The closet door was cracked open, just enough to show darkness inside. My breath shuddered as I stared at the thin gap, my mind racing with possibilities. Someone could be inside, waiting, watching me just as I had unknowingly been watched all along. I took a step back, then another. My instincts screamed at me to run, but I moved carefully, slowly retreating. I needed to get out. My back hit the front door, and with a swift motion, I turned the lock and yanked it open. The night air hit me like a slap, cold and grounding. I stumbled onto the porch, my heart still hammering. Without hesitation, I rushed to my car and locked the doors, my hands shaking as I started the engine. My house stood dark and still behind me, but I knew better. Someone had been inside. Maybe they still were. I drove to the nearest gas station and parked beneath the bright lights. My fingers hovered over my phone, debating my next move. Calling the police felt pointless. Nothing was stolen, no damage was done. But the violation was undeniable. Someone had entered my home, lingered, left a message. And worst of all, they had left without me ever knowing they were there. I sat in my car for what felt like hours, watching the empty parking lot, replaying every moment. The note, the furniture, the barely audible creak in the hallway, the closet door slightly ajar. The realization hit me like ice in my veins. Had they been waiting for me? Had I just narrowly escaped something far worse? A shudder racked through me as I put the car in drive. I couldn't go back. Not tonight. Maybe not ever. I needed somewhere safe, somewhere far from that house and whatever had invaded it. As I drove away, I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't over. Whoever had been there, they had left on their own terms, and something told me they weren't done watching. Story 24. I had been looking forward to the party all week. My friend Jason had sent me the details a few days ago, saying it was going to be at a house just outside the city. He promised it would be a small gathering, nothing too wild, just good music and good company. I hadn't been out in a while, so I figured it would be a nice change of pace. The drive out there was longer than I expected. The roads twisted through a heavily wooded area, the streetlights becoming less frequent the further I went. My GPS kept routing, struggling to keep a connection in the remote area. I felt a little uneasy, but Jason had always been reliable, so I pushed aside my doubts and kept driving. When I finally pulled up to the address he sent me, I frowned. The house was completely dark, no sign of life inside or outside. There were no other cars parked nearby, no music, no distant voices. I double-checked my phone to make sure I had the right place, but the signal was weak. I sat in my car for a moment, debating whether to text Jason or call him. The last message he sent me confirmed the location and time, so I couldn't figure out what had gone wrong. Maybe I was just early. I decided to go up to the house and check. As I stepped out, the air was colder than I expected, and the silence around me was unnerving. The trees loomed over the house, their branches barely swaying in the still night. The gravel under my feet crunched loudly as I made my way to the front door. I knocked, waiting for an answer. There was no response. I knocked again, harder this time, straining my ears for any sound from inside. Still nothing. I tried the doorknob, expecting it to be locked, but to my surprise, it turned easily. The door creaked open into darkness. I hesitated before stepping inside. My phone's flashlight cut through the gloom, revealing an empty living room covered in dust. It didn't look like anyone had lived there for a long time. The furniture was old, the floorboards warped, and a musty smell filled the air. This couldn't be right. I called out Jason's name, my voice echoing in the empty space. No answer. I pulled out my phone to call him, but the signal was gone completely. A bad feeling settled in my stomach as I took another step forward. Something wasn't right. I turned to leave, but then I heard something. A faint sound like footsteps coming from somewhere deeper inside the house. My breath caught as I froze, trying to listen. The sound was slow and deliberate, like someone was moving carefully to avoid making noise. I forced myself to stay calm. Maybe Jason and the others were playing a prank on me. It would be just like him to set up something like this to mess with me. Jason. I called out again, my voice steadier this time. If this is a joke, it's not funny. Silence. The footsteps had stopped. My fingers tightened around my phone as I took another step back toward the door. Then, from somewhere upstairs, I heard a quiet creak, like someone shifting their weight on an old floorboard. I didn't wait to find out who or what was up there. I spun on my heel and rushed toward the door, but just as I reached it, I heard another noise. This time it was behind me. A sharp scrape, like something heavy being dragged across the floor. My heart pounded as I turned my flashlight toward the sound. Nothing. Just the empty living room, still and undisturbed. I swallowed hard, my mouth dry. I had to get out of there. I stepped outside, relief washing over me as I breathed in the crisp night air. But as I reached for my car door, I noticed something that made my stomach drop. My tires, they were slashed, all four of them. Panic surged through me as I turned, scanning the dark surroundings. Someone had done this while I was inside. Someone had been watching me. My phone was useless with no signal, and I was miles from the nearest town. A rustling sound came from the trees nearby, and I snapped my head in that direction. A shadow moved between the trunks too fast for me to make out any details. My pulse raced as I backed up, trying to think. Running wasn't an option. I had to find another way to get help. I turned back toward the house, considering whether there might be a landline inside. It was a long shot, but I had no other choice. Just as I took a step toward the door, a voice rang out from the darkness. "Leaving so soon?" The voice was low, almost amused, and it wasn't Jason's. My blood ran cold as I turned in slow motion, my flashlight sweeping over the trees. Nothing. The voice had come from somewhere close, but I saw no one. I couldn't stay here. I had to move. I sprinted toward the road, my shoes slipping on the gravel as I ran. If I could get far enough, maybe I'd find a signal. My lungs burned as I pushed forward, listening for footsteps behind me. But there was nothing. Just silence. I ran until my legs ached, finally stopping to catch my breath. I turned, expecting to see someone following me, but there was nothing. Just the dark road stretching behind me. Then my phone buzzed. My heart leapt as I pulled it out. A single message from Jason. "Where are you? The party started an hour ago." I stared at the screen, my breathing heavy. I quickly typed back, telling him where I was and what had happened. The reply came almost instantly. "That wasn't the right address. I never sent you that location." A chill ran through me as I looked back toward the distant, empty house. Someone had lured me there. Someone had been waiting. I didn't know who or why, but I knew one thing. I had been lucky to get away. Story 25. The package arrived on a rainy Tuesday afternoon, sitting on my doorstep without a return address. At first, I assumed it was something I had ordered and forgotten about. The cardboard was damp from the drizzle, the edges curling slightly. Something about it felt off, but I carried it inside anyway, shaking off the uneasy feeling settling in my stomach. I set it on the kitchen table, brushing away stray droplets of water before carefully peeling off the tape. Inside, a stack of thick, glossy photographs lay neatly arranged. My heart skipped a beat when I pulled out the first one. It was a picture of me, taken from behind while I walked home last week. A chill ran down my spine as I flipped through the images. Some were of me at work, others of me sitting on my porch, scrolling through my phone. One showed me inside my house through the living room window, my face illuminated by the TV's glow. My breath came short and ragged as the realization sank in whoever took these had been watching me for weeks. I shoved the photos back into the box, my hands trembling. My first instinct was to check every lock in the house, making sure my windows were secured. The idea that someone had been close enough to take these photos made my skin crawl. I grabbed my phone, hesitating only a moment before dialing the police. The officer on the other end listened patiently as I explained the situation. He asked me a few questions, his tone neutral but firm. When I mentioned the package had no return address, he let out a small sigh. "We'll send someone over," he said. "In the meantime, don't touch anything else." I hung up and backed away from the table, my pulse hammering in my ears. The rain outside had picked up, tapping against the windows in an eerie rhythm. Every shadow in my house suddenly felt like it could be hiding someone. The idea that they could still be watching me made my stomach turn. When the officer arrived, he examined the package carefully. His expression remained unreadable as he flipped through the photographs. "You're sure you don't recognize these?" he asked. I shook my head, hugging myself tightly. He set the photos down and pulled out a small notepad. "Have you noticed anyone hanging around your house lately? Any unfamiliar cars parked nearby?" I thought about it, trying to push past the panic clouding my mind. Nothing came to me, no strange faces, no eerie encounters until I remembered something. Last week I had gotten an alert from my security camera about motion in my driveway. When I checked the footage, there had been nothing there, just empty space. At the time, I had dismissed it as a glitch. But now, dread sank its claws into my chest. What if it hadn't been a glitch at all? I mentioned this to the officer, and he asked if I still had the footage. I pulled it up on my phone, scrolling back through the timestamps. My fingers shook as I tapped the notification from that night. The footage loaded, showing my driveway still and quiet. Then, for just a fraction of a second, there was a flicker of shadow moving just at the edge of the frame. The officer leaned in closer, replaying the footage. "That's someone," he muttered. "They must have stayed just outside the camera's view." My throat tightened at his words. The thought of someone lurking just beyond my sight, watching, waiting, it made my skin crawl. The officer took the package and photos with him, promising to run fingerprints and check local surveillance cameras. Before he left, he gave me a piece of advice. "Keep your doors locked, and if anything else happens, don't hesitate to call." His words were meant to reassure me, but they did the opposite. That night, I barely slept. Every creak of the house sent my heart into my throat. I kept checking my security cameras, flipping through the different angles, but nothing seemed out of place. Yet the feeling of being watched never left me. It clung to the air like a presence I couldn't shake. Days passed, and I heard nothing from the police. I wanted to believe it was over, that it had just been some twisted prank. But then, another package arrived. This time it wasn't left at my doorstep. It was inside my mailbox. My fingers trembled as I opened it, already knowing what I would find. More photos, more angles of my life I had never seen before. But this time there was something else inside. A small, folded piece of paper with a single sentence written in neat, precise handwriting. "You look so peaceful when you sleep." The room spun around me as a wave of nausea hit me. They had been inside my house. They had seen me asleep, vulnerable and unaware. My stomach twisted as I tried to remember if I had locked my bedroom window the night before. I grabbed my phone and called the officer I had spoken to before. He answered on the second ring, his voice immediately alert when I told him what happened. "We're on our way," he said. "Stay inside. Don't open the door for anyone." Minutes felt like hours as I sat in the middle of my living room, clutching my phone like a lifeline. Every sound outside made my heart jump. When the police finally arrived, I ran to the door, barely waiting for them to knock. They searched my house from top to bottom, checking every possible entry point. One of the officers found something that made my blood run cold. The lock on my back door had been tampered with, scratches near the handle, subtle but unmistakable. Someone had tried to get in. Maybe they had succeeded. The officers took the second package, their faces grim. "This isn't random," one of them said. "Whoever this is, they're fixated on you." I felt my knees go weak at the confirmation of my worst fear. This wasn't just someone playing games. This was targeted. Over the next few weeks, the police increased patrols in my area, but I never truly felt safe. I changed my locks, installed more cameras, even stayed at a friend's house for a while. But I knew deep down that if they wanted to watch me, they would find a way. The final package arrived a month later. No photos this time, just a single object wrapped in tissue paper. My heart pounded as I unwrapped it, revealing something that made my breath catch. It was a key. A key to my house. Story 26. It started when I checked my home security cameras out of curiosity. I had installed them a few months ago, but never paid much attention to the footage. That night I decided to scroll through past recordings just to see if anything unusual had ever happened. What I found made my stomach turn. A man was standing just beyond the porch light, facing my house. He didn't move, didn't shift, just stood there, watching. I felt a cold shiver run down my spine as I scrolled through more footage. He had been there the night before, and the night before that. I kept going back, searching through weeks of recordings, my hands trembling. The further I went, the worse it got. The man had been there every single night for months, always in the same spot, always facing the house. My breathing became uneven as I stared at the screen. I paused a clip and zoomed in, trying to make out his features, but the image was grainy. He was tall, wearing dark clothes, his face shadowed by a hood. My heart pounded as I glanced toward the window, half expecting to see him standing there right now. I checked the live feed, my pulse hammering in my ears. The porch was empty, but that didn't comfort me. He had a pattern. He came late at night, stood there for hours, and then disappeared before dawn. I had never noticed before. I had never checked. I wanted to call the police, but what could I tell them? That a man had been watching my house every night but had never actually done anything. That I had no clear image of his face. They wouldn't take me seriously. I needed more proof. That night I barely slept. Every creak of the house made my skin crawl. I kept checking the live feed, but nothing appeared. I told myself I was being paranoid, that maybe he had already moved on. But deep down I knew better. The next evening I set my alarm for 3 a.m. When it went off, I grabbed my phone with shaking hands and opened the security app. My stomach dropped. He was there, standing in the exact same spot, staring at my house like always. I watched him for a long time, my heart hammering in my chest. He never moved. He never tried to break in. He just watched. My fingers hovered over my phone screen, debating whether to call the police, but something in me resisted. I needed to know more. The following day, I bought additional cameras and installed them around my property. I adjusted the angles, making sure I covered every possible approach. If he had been doing this for months, I wanted to know how he got there and where he went. That night, I forced myself to stay awake. I kept my laptop open with the live feeds running. At exactly 3:14 a.m., he appeared again. I leaned closer, my breath shallow. But this time, something changed. For the first time, he moved. He tilted his head slightly, as if he knew I was watching. My fingers clenched into fists as I stared at the screen, unable to look away. Then, slowly, he took a single step forward. My entire body tensed. He had never done that before. He had always stayed in the same place. I shut my laptop and rushed to the window, my pulse in my throat. I hesitated before peering outside. The yard was empty. My eyes darted back to the security feed on my phone, and my blood ran cold. The screen showed him still standing there, but when I looked with my own eyes, nothing. I stumbled back from the window, my mind racing. Was the footage delayed? Was there an issue with the camera? Or was I dealing with something I didn't understand? I didn't sleep that night. I couldn't. The next morning I went through the recordings, determined to find something I had missed. As I scrolled, I noticed something strange. The timestamps on the footage didn't make sense. Some nights were missing chunks of time. Others showed brief glitches, static flashing for a second before resuming. I had never noticed before, but now it was obvious. Whoever or whatever this was, it had been tampering with my cameras. My hands shook as I rewound the footage again, focusing on the moment of interference. Each time the static appeared, the man seemed to be slightly closer to the house. I didn't know what to do. If I called the police, what would I even tell them? The footage alone wouldn't convince anyone. They would say it was just a malfunction, a trick of the light, I needed to see him for myself. That night, I stayed by the window, hidden behind the curtains. I kept my phone in my hand, refreshing the live feed over and over. At exactly 3:14 a.m. he appeared again. But this time I didn't just watch through the screen. I took a deep breath and stepped outside. The air was cold, and my skin prickled as I moved toward the front porch. I gripped my phone tightly, my heart pounding against my ribs. I stopped just before the steps, my breath visible in the night air. He was there, right where the cameras had always shown him. But he wasn't facing the house anymore. He was facing me. I froze, every instinct screaming at me to run. For a moment we just stood there, the silence stretching between us. Then, slowly, he raised a hand and pointed directly at me. My entire body locked up in terror. Before I could react, the porch light flickered and went out. The yard was plunged into darkness. I gasped and scrambled backward, fumbling to turn on my phone's flashlight. When the light flared, I aimed it toward where he had been standing. He was gone. I ran inside and locked every door, my hands shaking uncontrollably. My phone buzzed with an alert, motion detected. I hesitated before looking at the live feed. The cameras were filled with static. Then, for just a second, an image flashed across the screen. He was standing at my window. Story 27. Stopping at the gas station was supposed to be quick. I had been driving for hours through a stretch of empty highway, my only company the glow of my dashboard and the occasional headlights of a passing truck. When I spotted the small, dimly lit station off the road, I figured it was my best option to refuel and take a quick break. Inside, the station was nearly deserted. The cashier, a tired-looking man, barely glanced at me as I made my way to the restroom. The air smelled of stale coffee and something metallic, but I ignored it, too focused on getting back on the road. The restroom door creaked as I pushed it open, the fluorescent light inside flickering faintly. The bathroom was small and unremarkable. A single sink, a mirror with dark spots creeping along the edges, and a stall that looked like it had seen better days. I stepped inside, letting the door swing shut behind me, and quickly did what I needed to do. The silence in the room was heavy, the kind that makes you feel like someone else is there. When I finished, I reached for the door handle and twisted. It didn't budge. I frowned, trying again, but it still wouldn't turn. The lock was undone, so there was no reason it should be stuck. I pushed my weight against it, but the door held firm, refusing to give. A cold wave of unease crept up my spine. Maybe the humidity had swollen the wood, making it stick. That had to be it. Taking a deep breath, I braced myself and yanked hard, but the handle wouldn't move. The silence pressed down on me as I stared at the door, my heartbeat picking up speed. Then, just beyond the door, a voice whispered, "Don't scream." My breath caught in my throat. The voice was soft, barely more than a breath, but the words were clear. Every hair on my body stood on end as I stumbled back, my legs hitting the sink behind me. Someone was out there, someone who knew I was trapped. I pressed my ear against the door, straining to hear any movement. Nothing. The gas station had been empty except for the cashier, and I hadn't seen anyone else when I walked in. My mind raced, trying to make sense of it. Maybe it was a prank, some bored worker messing with me. But something about that whisper felt too deliberate, too unnatural. I tried to steady my breathing and forced myself to speak. "Hello." My voice came out hoarse, barely above a whisper. There was no response. The silence stretched, thick and suffocating, making the walls of the small bathroom feel even tighter. My fingers curled into fists as I swallowed the rising panic. I reached into my pocket for my phone, but my stomach dropped when I saw there was no signal. Of course, out here, in the middle of nowhere, there was no service. I debated banging on the door, calling for help, but the voice's warning echoed in my head. Don't scream. Something shifted outside the door, a slow, dragging sound like fabric scraping against the floor. My breath hitched as I took a step back, pressing myself against the cold tile wall. My mind screamed for me to move, to find a way out, but my body refused to obey. The sound stopped, replaced by a steady, deliberate breathing just beyond the door. I couldn't stay here. My eyes darted around the small room, searching for another exit. The vent above me was too small, and the only window was painted shut, too narrow to squeeze through. My only way out was through the door. I had to get out before whoever was outside decided to come in. My hands shook as I grabbed the handle again and twisted with all my strength. The metal groaned, but it didn't give. I could feel my pulse hammering in my throat as I yanked harder, desperation making my hands slick with sweat. If I couldn't get out, I didn't know what would happen next. Then, the breathing stopped. For a long, terrifying moment, there was nothing but silence. And then, without warning, the door handle twisted from the other side. My stomach clenched as I stumbled back, barely stifling a gasp. The handle rattled once, then again, as if whoever was outside was testing it, making sure I was still trapped. My entire body went rigid as I held my breath, pressing myself flat against the wall. The rattling stopped, replaced by something worse, a slow, deliberate tap on the wood. Tap, tap, tap. A shiver ran through me, my skin prickling as if something cold had brushed against me. The tapping was light, almost playful, like whoever was outside had all the time in the world. I clenched my fists, my mind racing. I couldn't just wait for whatever was out there to come in. I needed to fight back. My eyes landed on the rusted metal trash can in the corner. It wasn't much, but it was heavy. Grabbing it with both hands, I held it up, ready to swing the moment the door opened. Then, just as suddenly as it had started, the tapping stopped. A deep silence followed, so complete it felt unnatural. I stayed frozen, waiting for anything to happen. But there was nothing. No footsteps retreating, no breathing, no sound at all. Minutes passed, stretching into an eternity. Finally, I took a shaky breath and reached for the handle again. This time it turned easily. The door creaked open, revealing the dimly lit gas station beyond. My heart pounded as I stepped out, scanning the empty store. The cashier was gone. The aisles stood silent, untouched. I hurried toward the exit, my hands trembling. As I stepped outside, the cool night air hit my skin, but it did little to calm the fear still clenching my chest. My car was where I had left it, the only vehicle in the lot. I climbed inside and locked the doors, my breath coming in shallow gasps. As I turned the key, my headlights illuminated the front of the station. That was when I saw it. The restroom door, still slightly ajar, swung open wider, and for just a second, in the flickering light, I saw the faintest outline of a figure standing inside, watching. I slammed the car into reverse, my tires screeching against the pavement as I sped away. I didn't look back. I didn't stop driving until I was miles down the road. The gas station a distant memory in my rearview mirror. But even now, I can still hear that whisper in the back of my mind. Don't scream. Story 28. It started as an ordinary evening. I had just finished a long day at work and collapsed onto my bed, scrolling mindlessly through my phone. The exhaustion was catching up to me, and soon my eyes felt heavy. Before I knew it, I had drifted into a deep sleep. The next morning I woke up feeling groggy, my phone still clutched in my hand. I sat up, rubbing my eyes, and checked the time. The screen was dimly lit, notifications stacking up from missed messages. As I swiped through them, something caught my attention. There was a new album in my photo gallery. Confused, I clicked on it, expecting to see screenshots or accidental pictures taken while half asleep. Instead, my breath caught in my throat. The album contained dozens of photos of me sleeping. My pulse quickened as I scrolled through them. The pictures were taken from different angles, some close to my face, others from the foot of my bed. My blankets were slightly shifted in each shot, proving they weren't all taken at the same time. A chill crept down my spine as I realized what this meant. Someone had been in my room. My hands trembled as I exited the gallery, my mind racing. My apartment was locked, the windows shut. I lived alone. There was no one who could have taken these pictures. I forced myself to check the timestamps. The photos started appearing around 2:37 a.m. and continued until just before sunrise. My stomach twisted as I tried to remember anything unusual from the night before, but I had fallen asleep easily. I hadn't heard anything. Swallowing hard, I got up and checked my apartment. The front door was still locked, the windows secured. There were no signs of forced entry. Everything was exactly as I had left it, and yet the pictures were proof that someone had been inside. I went back to my phone, opening the gallery again, my skin crawling. In one of the last pictures, I noticed something new. In the background, near the edge of my bed, there was a shadowy figure. It was barely visible, but unmistakably human. My breath came in short gasps as I zoomed in. The figure was tall, standing in the corner of my room watching me. I felt sick, my heart pounding so hard it hurt. I hadn't been alone last night. A sudden thought struck me, and I quickly checked my apartment's security app. I had installed a motion-activated camera in my living room months ago, Momaniendo. Peace of mind. My fingers fumbled as I pulled up the footage. The video from last night showed nothing at first. Just the dimly lit living room, the occasional flicker from the streetlights outside. Then, at 2:36 a.m., the screen changed. The camera detected movement. A tall figure emerged from the hallway leading to my bedroom. My stomach lurched as I watched. The figure moved slowly, carefully, as if trying not to make a sound. They stood at the edge of my doorway, staring inside for what felt like an eternity. Then, they stepped forward. I stopped the video, unable to watch anymore. My hands were shaking so badly I almost dropped my phone. This wasn't a prank. It wasn't a glitch. Someone had been in my home while I slept. Panic surged through me as I grabbed my keys. I couldn't stay here. I rushed to my front door, hesitating only to double-check the locks before stepping outside. The morning air was cool, but I was sweating. I needed to go somewhere safe. I drove to a nearby coffee shop, my mind racing. I had to call someone, the police maybe, but what would I even say? There was no sign of forced entry, no stolen belongings, just pictures that proved someone had watched me sleep. As I sat there, staring at my phone, a new thought struck me. I had to check the rest of my security footage. Maybe it would show how the intruder got in. Maybe it would give me something useful. Taking a deep breath, I pulled up the app again. My heart pounded as I scrolled through the timeline. Then I saw another clip, recorded just before dawn. My throat tightened as I pressed play. The footage showed my bedroom door. At first it was slightly ajar, just as I had left it. Then, slowly, it started to close. But the worst part wasn't the door moving, it was the hand. A pale hand, long fingers curled around the edge of the door, pulled it shut with eerie slowness. My stomach churned as I realized what this meant. Whoever had been inside my apartment hadn't just watched me sleep. They had still been there when I woke up. A cold shiver ran down my spine as I locked my phone. I felt exposed, vulnerable in a way I never had before. I couldn't go back to that apartment, not until I knew how they got in, not until I knew they were gone. I decided to call the police. My voice was unsteady as I explained what I had found. They took it seriously, sending an officer to check my apartment while I waited at the coffee shop. The minutes dragged on, my nerves fraying with each passing second. Finally, my phone buzzed with an update. The officer had found no signs of forced entry. No footprints, no fingerprints, nothing. It was as if no one had ever been there. But I knew the truth. I had proof. The pictures. The video. Someone had been inside and they had been close enough to take those photos. Close enough to shut my door while I slept. The officer advised me to stay somewhere else for a while, at least until I could install better security. I nodded, already knowing I would never sleep in that apartment again. There was no way I could shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. I left the coffee shop and checked into a hotel, my body tense with exhaustion. My mind refused to rest, reeing the images over and over. The pictures, the shadowy figure, the hand on the door. As I lay in the unfamiliar hotel bed, I checked my phone one last time. I hesitated before opening my gallery, part of me too afraid to see what was there. But I needed to know. I clicked on the album, holding my breath. My stomach dropped. There were new photos. Photos of me, in this bed. Story 29. I was lying on my bed when my phone vibrated. A message from my friend, Rachel. She said she was at a party but felt uncomfortable, that something was off. Her words were short, direct, not like her usual texts. I sat up immediately, my instincts kicking in. I asked her where she was, and she sent me a location pin a few seconds later. It was a house about 15 minutes away, a place I didn't recognize. I told her I was on my way and grabbed my car keys without hesitation. The drive felt longer than it was, my mind racing with possibilities. Rachel wasn't the type to get spooked easily, which made her message even more unsettling. As I neared the address, I could see the glow of lights and hear the distant hum of music. The party was still in full swing. I parked on the street and hurried up the driveway, the sound of laughter and conversation growing louder. People were scattered around the front yard, some holding drinks, others engaged in deep conversation. I pushed through the crowd, searching for Rachel's familiar face. I found a guy standing by the door, clearly acting as some sort of gatekeeper. I asked him if he had seen Rachel, describing her in detail. He furrowed his brows, shaking his head. He claimed he didn't know her and that she hadn't been there. Confused, I pulled up her message, showing him the location pin she had sent me. He glanced at it and shrugged, saying plenty of people came and went, but if she was inside, he hadn't noticed. His casual indifference sent a chill through me. I stepped past him and into the house, my eyes scanning the crowded rooms. The air was thick with the scent of alcohol, sweat, and something else, something off. I wove through groups of people, checking every corner, calling her name, but no one reacted. Finally, I spotted a girl I recognized from Rachel's classes and rushed over to her. She gave me a confused look when I asked about Rachel, tilting her head like I was speaking nonsense. She insisted Rachel hadn't been at the party at all. I felt a knot tighten in my stomach. That wasn't possible. I showed her the message, my proof that Rachel had been here. The girl frowned, reading the text, but simply shook her head, saying she had been there all night and never saw her. I moved from person to person, asking if anyone had seen her, but the response was always the same. Some people even laughed, assuming I was playing some kind of prank. My frustration grew, my heart pounding harder with each passing second. I texted Rachel again, asking where she was, but there was no response. I tried calling and the phone rang, but she didn't pick up. I felt like I was losing my grip on reality. She had texted me from this exact place, but now, it was as if she had never been here at all. I decided to check outside, stepping onto the backyard patio where a few people sat around a fire pit. The air was crisp, the laughter softer out here, but the eerie feeling in my chest only deepened. I scanned the yard, looking for any sign of her, but found nothing. Then, I noticed something strange, a single red plastic cup sitting on the ground near the fence, next to a phone. My breath caught as I moved closer, recognizing the phone case immediately. It was Rachel's. I bent down and picked it up, my hands trembling. The screen was locked, but the battery was still on. I turned to the group by the fire pit, holding it up, asking if anyone had seen who left it there. They all shook their heads. Panic clawed at my chest. If she had left her phone behind, where was she? My mind spiraled, every possible explanation feeling worse than the last. I needed to get help. I called the police, stepping away from the crowd, my voice barely steady as I explained the situation. They told me to stay put, that an officer would be on the way. I clutched Rachel's phone tightly, my thoughts racing. Minutes passed, but they felt like hours. I kept glancing around, half expecting Rachel to suddenly appear and tell me it was all a misunderstanding. But she never did. The party continued around me, people oblivious to the growing dread curling inside me. Finally, flashing lights lit up the street, and a police officer approached me. I explained everything again, from the texts to finding her phone. He nodded, taking notes, then started questioning the partygoers. One by one, they all said the same thing: they had no memory of Rachel being there. The officer frowned, clearly skeptical, but I could see the doubt creeping into his expression. I couldn't blame him. It sounded impossible. The officer took Rachel's phone as evidence, promising to investigate further. I drove home that night, my mind buzzing with unanswered questions. I barely slept, my dreams plagued by Rachel's voice whispering my name, distant and afraid. The next day, I checked her social media, hoping for any sign of her, but there was nothing. Her last post was from the morning before, a simple selfie with no indication that anything was wrong. I tried calling her again, but her phone had been turned off. Days turned into weeks, and the investigation led nowhere. There were no security cameras at the house, no witnesses, no leads. Rachel had simply vanished, her last known location leading to a party where no one remembered her. Her family was devastated, but the police eventually treated her case as a voluntary disappearance. They believed she had run away. But I knew better. She had been scared. She had reached out to me. And now, she was gone. I kept replaying that night over and over, searching for something I had missed. But the truth was simple and terrifying. Rachel had gone to that party. She had been there. And somehow, every single person had forgotten her. Story 30. I first heard the noise late at night, a faint shuffling sound that seemed to come from below. At first I ignored it, thinking it was just a house settling or maybe a draft shifting something around. But as the nights passed, the noise grew more distinct: footsteps, slow and deliberate, moving beneath me. A deep unease settled in my chest as I realized the sound wasn't going away. One evening, after another round of unexplained creaks and soft thuds, I decided to check the basement. I grabbed a flashlight, hesitating at the top of the stairs before forcing myself to go down. The air was damp, heavy with the scent of old wood and dust, and the dim light from the single overhead bulb cast deep shadows along the concrete floor. As I stepped further in, I felt an unnatural stillness, as if something had been disturbed. I moved cautiously, scanning the space for anything unusual. Most of the basement was as I had left it: boxes stacked along the walls, old furniture covered in sheets, a workbench cluttered with forgotten tools. But in the farthest corner, behind an old shelving unit, something caught my eye. A pile of blankets, flattened cardboard, and a few empty food wrappers were arranged neatly in a hidden space. My breath caught in my throat as I realized what I was looking at. Someone had been living in my basement. The makeshift bed, the scattered belongings, it wasn't just a stray animal or some forgotten mess. Someone had been sleeping here, hiding beneath my feet while I went about my daily life. The thought made my skin crawl. I backed away, heart pounding, as my mind raced with possibilities. How long had they been here? Were they still in the house? A chill ran down my spine as I turned toward the stairs, suddenly feeling exposed in the dim, silent basement. Just as I reached the first step, something shifted behind me. I froze, gripping the flashlight tighter, my pulse hammering in my ears. The sound was subtle, barely more than a whisper of movement, but it was enough. I turned slowly, aiming the beam of light toward the darkened corner where the makeshift bed lay. The blankets had shifted, as if someone had been there only moments ago. Panic surged through me as I took a step back, my legs trembling. I needed to get out, to call the police, to lock every door and window in the house. But just as I turned to run up the stairs, the overhead light flickered once, then went out completely. The basement was swallowed by darkness. A sharp, ragged breath echoed from the shadows, too close, too real. My chest tightened as I struggled to control my breathing, the weight of the silence pressing down on me. I fumbled with the flashlight, my fingers slick with sweat, trying to steady the beam. The darkness felt suffocating, as if something unseen was creeping toward me. Then, a sound so soft, so deliberate. A single footstep against the concrete floor. My stomach dropped as I realized I wasn't alone. Whoever had been living here was still here, and they were watching me. I bolted up the stairs, my legs burning as I took them two at a time, my pulse pounding in my ears. As I reached the top, I slammed the door shut and locked it, pressing my weight against it, as if that alone could keep whatever was down there from following me. My hands shook as I reached for my phone, dialing the police with frantic fingers. When the officers arrived, I barely managed to explain what had happened. They searched the basement, their flashlights cutting through the darkness, illuminating the makeshift bed and the scattered belongings. But the space was empty. Whoever had been down there was gone. The only sign of their presence was a small, dirty notebook tucked beneath the blankets. One of the officers flipped through the pages, his expression darkening. Inside were notes, dates, times, descriptions. My descriptions. The way I moved through the house, the times I left, the times I returned. My blood ran cold as I realized they had been watching me, documenting my life from below. The police searched the rest of the house and the surrounding property, but found no trace of the intruder. There were no signs of forced entry, no obvious way for someone to have come and gone undetected. They could only guess that the person had slipped away through the storm cellar doors before I reached the basement. That night, sleep was impossible. Every creak, every whisper of wind against the house sent my heart racing. I double-checked every lock, every window, every door, but the sense of unease wouldn't leave. The thought that someone had lived beneath me, unseen and unnoticed, burrowed into my mind like a parasite. Days passed, but the fear lingered. I installed security cameras, changed the locks, even considered moving. The police never found the person, and with no clear evidence of a break-in, they could only advise me to stay cautious. But the worst part wasn't the idea that someone had been in my home. It was the feeling that they were still watching. One evening, as I sat in my living room, trying to push the fear away, my phone buzzed with a motion alert. My breath caught as I checked the security footage. The basement camera had picked up movement. A single frame, blurry and grainy, but enough to make my blood turn to ice. A figure stood just inside the storm cellar doors, half hidden in the shadows. They weren't trying to break in. They were standing still, looking up toward the house, watching, waiting.